Hey there, all you beautiful souls. I hope your day has been absolutely fantastic. Welcome back for yet another exciting episode. Today we're diving deep into a brand new timeline. What if Naruto Uzumaki was reincarnated into high school DxD, but as a complete anomaly that no faction can classify? When a stray devil attack cracks open a dormant echo of the nine-tailed fox, Naruto begins to remember a life as the Seventh Hokage. His energy defies all supernatural taxonomy, sending shockwaves through heaven, hell, and the fallen. As he finds his place among Rias Gremory's peerage, his very existence becomes the spark that could ignite a new war or forge an unprecedented peace. If this timeline sparks your curiosity, drop a comment down below. I'd love to hear your take on it. And while you're here, make sure to explore the library of other intriguing what-ifs on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. So now, let's start this video. The stray devil screamed in a tone no human throat could make, and Naruto felt something behind his ribs wake up. Rain hammered the train station platform in sheets of silver gray, turning the evening commute into a chaos of umbrellas and hurried footsteps. But the commuters had scattered now, fleeing the creature that had materialized from the shadows near the ticket gates. It stood 9 feet tall, its body a twisted amalgamation of chitinous plates and exposed muscle tissue, 4 arms ending in claws that dripped with something that sizzled when it hit the concrete. Its face was a nightmare of too many eyes and a mouth that split vertically, emitting that horrible, resonant shriek. Naruto Uzumaki stood between the creature and a fallen businessman who was scrambling backward on his hands, briefcase abandoned, tie askew. The rain plastered Naruto's blonde hair to his forehead, dripped from his chin, but his eyes never left the devil. His hands were raised in a stance he didn't consciously remember learning, feet planted wide, weight centered, arms forming a loose guard that felt older than his 17-year-old body had any right to know. The stray lunged, and something inside Naruto's chest cracked open like ice breaking on a frozen river. The sensation was heat first, a furnace blast that erupted from somewhere behind his sternum and flooded every limb with liquid fire. Then came the color. Foxred energy, edged with a gold so pale it was nearly white, exploded from his body in a spiraling vortex. The rain within 10 feet of him vaporized instantly into steam. His eyes, normally a clear cerulean blue, flickered for just an instant into something else. Horizontal pupils, crimson irises. The eyes of a predator that had walked battlefields before human beings had invented the concept. He moved. One step carried him across 15 feet of rain-slicked concrete like the distance had simply ceased to exist. His right hand drove forward, and the fox-red energy coalesced around his fist into a shape his conscious mind couldn't name, but his body remembered perfectly. The strike connected with the stray devil's chest, and the creature's chitinous armor didn't just break, it disintegrated. The energy punched through, expanding outward, and the devil came apart in a soundless eruption of red light and dissolving flesh. No blood, no remains, just the fading afterimage of a fox's snarling visage superimposed over Naruto's own face, and then the rain rushed back in to fill the space where the monster had been. Naruto stood alone on the platform, steam curling around him, his hands shaking. His eyes were his own again, blue, human, bewildered. The heat behind his ribs had receded to something smaller, something that pulsed with a rhythm that wasn't quite his heartbeat. It felt like a second presence curled up in the core of him, warm and ancient and utterly alien. He looked down at his trembling fingers. The words came out before he knew he was speaking them, barely a whisper lost in the rain. The stray devil had been destroyed in seconds, but Naruto Uzumaki had no idea what he had just done. Rias Gremory arrived at Kute train station 4 minutes after the energy spike registered on her detection grid. She materialized from a teleport circle of crimson magic at the far end of the platform, Akeno Himejima stepping through half a breath behind her. Both wore their Kute Academy uniforms, the fabric immediately darkening with rain. Akeno's hand was already raised, a crackle of lightning dancing between her fingers. Ria's expression was controlled, but her heart hammered against her ribs. She had felt that surge from 3 miles away. Whatever had just occurred on this platform, it wasn't the work of any devil, fallen angel, or sacred gear user she had ever encountered. The energy signature was, wrong wasn't the right word. It was older, deeper, like hearing a language you didn't speak but somehow understood in your bones. Then she saw him. Naruto Uzumaki stood in the center of the platform, steam still rising from his clothes. His hands hung at his sides, fingers occasionally twitching. His eyes were unfocused, staring at something only he could see. He didn't seem to notice the rain at all. Akeno moved to flank the position, her lightning ready, but Rias raised a hand to stop her. Something in Naruto's posture made her chest tighten. He wasn't a threat, he was lost. He muttered something as she approached, his voice hoarse and smaller than it should be for a boy who had just obliterated a stray devil with a single strike. His eyes lifted to meet hers, and the confusion in them was so raw, so genuine, that Rias felt her carefully maintained composure crack at the edges. Naruto stumbled back a step, then another. His hand pressed against his chest, right over his sternum, where that second pulse was still beating in counterpoint to his heart. He looked at Rias like he was seeing her for the first time and like he had seen her 1,000 times before, both things at once, neither making any sense. He turned before she could answer. Shoulders hunched, gait unsteady, Naruto Uzumaki walked away into the rain-soaked evening. He didn't run, he simply retreated. Into the darkness between the station's lights, heading toward the residential district where his small apartment waited. The steam around him faded. The second pulse in his chest settled into something quiescent. Not gone, just watching. Rias watched him go. Akeno drifted to her side, the lightning fading from her palm. Rias didn't answer for a long moment. The rain drummed against the platform roof, filling the silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral, but her hands were clenched at her sides, because this wasn't the first time she had monitored Naruto Uzumaki. It wasn't the 10th time or the 100th. She had been watching him since childhood, ever since she'd found his file buried in the Gremory intelligence archives. Found as an infant after a mundane disaster, a gauze explosion, the report said had killed his adoptive parents and leveled half a city block. He had been the sole survivor, discovered in the rubble without a scratch, his energy signature already baffling every detection grid that tried to classify it. Angelic, no. Demonic, no. Sacred gear, nothing registered. He was a walking null result, and null results in the supernatural world were either errors or threats. Rias had buried his file. She had been 15 at the time, already chafing under the weight of her engagement to Riser Fenix, already looking for cracks in the systems that bound her. And here was this boy, this anomaly, who proved that the neat taxonomies of heaven, hell, and the fallen were not absolute. If Surzets had known, if her brother the Satan had seen that file, Naruto would have been quietly eliminated. A threat to the order, a variable that couldn't be controlled, so she had hidden him, watched him grow up from a distance. Enrolled him in Ku Academy when the time came, ensuring he stayed close enough to monitor. And for years, nothing had happened. He had been ordinary, cheerful, loud in the hallways, terrible at math. He ate ramen at the same shop 3 times a week and tripped over his own feet in gym class and was, by every observable metric, completely unremarkable. Until tonight. Rias stared at the steam still curling off the wet concrete where Naruto had stood. The energy signature was fading now, but she had felt it clearly. That was not unremarkable. That was the opposite of unremarkable. That was the kind of power that could reshape the entire political landscape of the supernatural world. Akeno moved closer, her voice soft. She studied Ria's face with the keen perception of someone who had known her for years. Rias turned away from the empty platform. In the weekly aftermath of the station incident, Naruto Uzumaki's life continued with a strange, disjointed normalcy. He went to class. He ate his lunch on the roof, legs dangling over the edge. He laughed at Issei Hyodu's increasingly desperate attempts to start a harem, and commiserated with Matsuda and Madohama about the unfairness of attractive women existing. He was, to all external observation, perfectly fine, but the fragments had begun. It started with dreams. Night after night, Naruto found himself standing before a massive cage. The bars were rust-red and ancient, stretching up into darkness so profound that no light could penetrate it. Behind those bars, 9 tails swept in languid arcs, each one the size of a building. And in the darkness beyond, 2 eyes opened, crimson, slit-pupiled, ancient beyond measure. The growl that rolled through those dreams wasn't words, it wasn't even a threat. It was a sensation, a complex weave of emotions that somehow translated directly into meaning. Frustration, patience, a fierce, protective warmth that felt like a bonfire pressed against his soul. The creature in the cage was waiting for something. It wasn't angry, it was watchful, patient, like a partner who had agreed to a long separation and was counting the days until reunification. Naruto would wake from these dreams with his chest aching and tears on his cheeks that he couldn't explain. The second heartbeat, he'd started thinking of it as the echo, would pulse once, twice, and then settle, sending him a wash of reassurance that had no words but a very clear meaning. During his waking hours, the fragments came differently. He would be walking to class when a smell would hit him, ozone and electricity, and suddenly the hallway would be overlaid with an image of a silver-haired man, one eye visible above a mask, a book in his hand. The image would last half a second and then vanish, leaving Naruto standing frozen while students pushed past him. Or he would be eating ramen at the shop, slurping noodles with practiced efficiency, and his hand would start to rotate without his conscious direction. Palm-up fingers slightly curled, as if cupping something. The motion felt important. It felt like the beginning of something. But when he tried to complete it, tried to remember what came next, the knowledge slipped away like water through his fingers. All that remained was the ghost of a sensation, something blue and spinning, something that roared in his palm. The worst moments came at night. Lying in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, Naruto would feel the echo stir. A question would form in his mind, unspoken but clear. The echo would respond with a pulse of frustration, not at him, at the situation, at the distance between them, at whatever force had brought them to this world with their memories scattered and their bond intact but muted. The feeling was complex, tangled sensations of separation and loyalty, and a desperate, aching hope that Naruto understood without understanding. It was a warm afternoon when everything changed again. Naruto was walking home from school with Issei, listening to the brown-haired boy complain about a girl who had agreed to go on a date with him. A girl named Yuma, apparently. She was cute, she had asked him out. Issei was convinced this was the beginning of his harem protagonist destiny. Naruto had laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. He told him to enjoy the date and not be a creep about it. Standard friend stuff, nothing that suggested he knew what was coming. That evening, as Naruto was heating instant ramen in his apartment, the echo snarled. It was the first vocalization he'd experienced while awake, a low, rolling growl that vibrated through his entire nervous system. The sensation was unmistakably hostile. Warning, something bad was happening. The echo's attention was fixed on a point somewhere in the city, and through their bond, Naruto felt what the echo felt, a sacred gear, a powerful one, and then extinguishment. Issei Hyodu died at sunset. Naruto didn't know that consciously. He knew it in the way his chest seized, in the way the echo's growl deepened into something almost mournful, in the way the ramen cup slipped from his fingers and spilled across the kitchen floor. Something precious had been snuffed out, someone with potential, someone who had been marked. He spent that night sitting on his apartment balcony, staring out at the city lights, the echo pulsing a constant low-level alertness that kept sleep at bay. He didn't know why he felt like he had failed something. He didn't know why the echo's attention had fixed so intently on a boy Naruto barely knew beyond lunchtime conversations and hallway high-fives. The answer came the next morning. Issei Hyodu walked into Ku Academy looking physically unchanged, but the echo inside Naruto immediately bristled. There was something inside Issei now, something that hadn't been there the day before. The boosted gear, the Red Dragon Emperor's sacred artifact, had activated during Issei's resurrection as a devil, and its energy signature blazed like a beacon to Naruto's newly awakened senses. Issei didn't know what was happening. He could barely control it. The boosted gear kept flaring at random moments, a gauntlet of red energy manifesting on his left arm before disappearing just as quickly. Students stared. Teachers frowned. Issei looked like he was about to have a panic attack. Naruto found him in the stairwell between the second and third floors, sitting on the steps with his head in his hands. The boosted gear flickered weakly on his arm, destabilizing. Naruto sat down next to him. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply sat, their shoulders almost touching, and waited. The echo in his chest hummed a low-note recognition. The boosted gear responded by stabilizing slightly, its chaotic flickering smoothing into a steady glow. Issei looked at him, eyes wide with fear and confusion. He stammered something about dying, about a girl with black wings, about waking up in a room with a red-haired woman who had pressed a chess piece into his chest. The words tumbled out in a desperate rush, and Naruto listened to all of it without flinching. When Issei finally ran out of words, exhausted and trembling, Naruto spoke quietly. He admitted that something ancient lived inside him too, something he didn't fully understand. Something that had been with him longer than he could remember. He didn't have answers, but he understood what it felt like to suddenly not be alone in your own body. Issei stared at him for a long moment. Then, without warning, he grabbed Naruto's wrist and hauled him to his feet. He said there was someone who could help, someone who had answers, someone who had been looking for Naruto for a very long time. The Occult Research Club room was larger than it had any right to be, occupying the top floor of the old school building with windows that overlooked the entire campus. When Issei dragged Naruto through the door, Rias Gremory was already waiting. She sat behind a desk that looked more suited to a corporate executive than a high school student, her red hair cascading over her shoulders, her expression carefully composed. Akeno stood at her right shoulder, elegant and watchful. A small white-haired girl, Koneko Taoju, sat on a couch in the corner, her golden eyes fixed on Naruto with an intensity that bordered on aggression. Rias rose from her chair. Her voice was calm, but there was a tension in her shoulders that Naruto didn't miss. She told him she knew about his energy. She knew about the station incident. She had been monitoring him since he was a child, hiding his existence from the supernatural authorities that would have eliminated him as a threat. She apologized for the secrecy, but she didn't apologize for the choice. She had done what was necessary to keep him alive. Naruto absorbed this in silence. The echo pulsed once, a sensation that felt like grudging approval. Not trust, not yet. but recognition that this woman had put herself at risk for him, however distant that risk had been. Rias explained the supernatural world, devils, angels, and fallen angels, the three factions. The political tensions that simmered beneath the surface of every treaty. The creatures called strays, devils who had gone rogue and needed to be eliminated by their own kind. She explained that Naruto's energy signature was unclassifiable. It predated the current system. It could destabilize everything. When she finished, the room was silent. Akeno's smile had sharpened slightly. Koneko's stare hadn't wavered. Issei hovered near the door, looking between Naruto and Rias like he was watching a negotiation with stakes he didn't fully understand. Rias offered him her hand. Naruto looked at her hand for a long moment. He felt the echo's warmth spread through his chest, not a command but a reminder. He was not alone. He had never been alone, and he didn't belong to anyone's system. He met Rias' eyes and shook his head. He said he would help. If there were strays threatening humans, he would fight. If his energy could somehow stabilize the chaos, he would offer that stability, but he wouldn't become a piece. He didn't belong to a chessboard. He had been part of something bigger once. He was starting to remember that much, and whatever that something was, it had taught him that independence was not the same as isolation. Ria's expression flickered. For just an instant, something like admiration crossed her face. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual controlled composure. She withdrew her hand and nodded and told him that was acceptable. For now. That night after the club room had emptied and Naruto had walked home through the quiet streets of Kuo, Rias Gremory descended into the basement of the old school building. The room was warded against detection, lined with magical circles and detection equipment that hummed with quiet power. In the center, on a pedestal of obsidian, sat a single evil piece, one of the spare rooks that she had kept in reserve. She had collected residual energy from the train station platform, just a trace, enough to test. The procedure was simple: expose the piece to the energy signature and observe the reaction. Under normal circumstances, the piece would glow, then dim. It would indicate compatibility or incompatibility. It would not do what it did now. Rias channeled the stored energy toward the piece. The obsidian pedestal flared. The evil piece lit up from within, its surface crawling with fox-red light. And then, with a sound like a gunshot, it cracked. A fracture split down its center and chaotic energy erupted outward, shorting out half the detection equipment in the room. Sparks flew, wards flickered. The piece fell to the pedestal in two distinct halves, still smoking. Rias stared at the wreckage. Her breathing was shallow. The incompatibility wasn't just absolute, it was catastrophic. If she had attempted to reincarnate Naruto with an evil piece directly, the resulting feedback could have killed them both. She needed to call Serzets. She needed to tell him what she had been hiding for years, what she had just confirmed beyond any doubt. Her brother was one of the four Satans, the rulers of Devil Society, and he had a right to know that a pre-systemic entity was living in his sister's territory. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Serzets Lucifer's voice was warm, familiar, touched with the affection he always reserved for his little sister. Rias took a breath. She said they needed to talk about Naruto Uzumaki. She said there had been an incident at the train station and an evil peace test, and that she had been hiding him for 6 years because she was afraid of what Serzets would do if he found out the truth. The line was silent for a moment. Then Serzets spoke again, and his voice was calm. Too calm. The voice of someone who had already processed information and moved on to strategy. The call ended. Rias lowered the phone, her hand trembling slightly. She had expected anger. She had expected disappointment. She had not expected him to already know. Serzets Lucifer, the Satan of compassion and wisdom, had been watching Naruto Uzumaki for years, and he had never told her. Somewhere across the city, in a small apartment with bare walls and a single window facing the stars, Naruto Uzumaki lay on his futon with his eyes closed. Sleep tugged at the edges of his consciousness, but he fought it. He was learning to listen to the echo now, not just feel it, but understand it. And right now, the echo was cold, a deep, aching chill that spread through his chest and settled in his bones. It was a warning, a message that needed no words to be understood. Serzets Lucifer was coming, and the political machinery of the supernatural world was already grinding into motion. The anomaly that was Naruto Uzumaki was about to be exposed to forces that would either protect him or destroy him. In the darkness of his apartment, Naruto's hand pressed against his chest. The echo pulsed beneath his palm, warm, steady, undeniably alive. Whatever was coming, he wouldn't face it alone. But as sleep finally claimed him and the dreams of the cage and the nine-tailed shadow returned, one question echoed through his fragmented memories. Who had he been before this world? And what had he lost to get here? The answer hovered just beyond his grasp, wrapped in fox-red light and the distant sound of a roaring waterfall. The morning after the phone call, Serzets Lucifer teleported directly into the courtyard of Kuo Academy. The teleportation circle flared to life in a perfect ring of crimson light, its geometric patterns etching themselves into the air with mathematical precision. Students passing through the grounds felt a sudden pressure, an inexplicable heaviness that made them quicken their steps without knowing why. Teachers glanced at barometers that had inexplicably dropped. No one saw the arrival itself, only the aftermath of a presence that bent the atmosphere around it. Rias Gremory stood at the window of the occult research club room, her hand pressed flat against the glass. Her heart was in her throat. She had known this moment would come, had dreaded it for 6 years, and now it was here. The teleportation circle dissolved, leaving behind a man who wore his authority like a second skin. Serzech Lucifer, the Satan of compassion and wisdom, older brother to Rias, one of the 4 rulers of Devil Society. His crimson hair was a shade darker than hers, and his eyes held the weight of centuries. He looked up at the window and their gazes met. There was no anger in his expression, no disappointment, only the calm, unshakable certainty of someone who had already made his decisions. 10 minutes later, Naruto Uzumaki was escorted to a sealed chamber beneath the old school building. The room was lined with wards, layer upon layer of magical barriers that shimmered faintly in the corners of his vision. Serzech stood at the center, his posture relaxed, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. Rias hovered near the doorway, her Queen Akeno at her side, though both had been asked to wait outside. Serzech wanted this conversation to be private. The Satan studied Naruto with an expression that betrayed nothing. Naruto met his gaze without flinching, his hands shoved into his pockets, his shoulders squared. The echo inside him was alert, a steady pressure against his ribs, not aggressive, not hostile, but watchful. The sensation was like a low hum, a vibration that resonated with the wards in the room. Serzech began by thanking Naruto for agreeing to meet. He acknowledged the train station incident, the destruction of the stray devil, and the energy signature that had registered on detection grids across half the Kanto region. Then he spoke of something far older than devils or angels. Pre-systemic energy, he called it. An energy that existed before the 3 factions had formalized their magical taxonomies, before the evil peace system had been codified, before the current political order had calcified into what it was today. Naruto's soul radiated a power that predated every method of classification they possessed. It was not demonic, not angelic, not fallen. It was not yokai, not human, not sacred gear derived. It was something else entirely, something that broke the rules by simply existing. Serzech offered Naruto formal protection under the Gremory umbrella. He framed it as a matter of political stability. An anomaly of this magnitude could not be allowed to drift unaffiliated. Factions would circle. Factions would try to claim him or destroy him. The peace between heaven, hell, and the fallen was fragile, and an unclassified entity could become the match that set everything ablaze. Naruto listened. For a long moment, he said nothing. The echo pulsed warmth through his chest, a steady reassurance. He thought about the word protection, about what it meant for someone like Serzech, a ruler, a politician, a man who had to think in terms of systems and stability. It was not an offer born of malice, but it was an offer that came with expectations, with strings, with the assumption that Naruto would become a piece on a board he had never asked to play on. He refused, politely but firmly. He explained that he had never belonged to any system, and he wasn't about to start now. If people feared him, they would have to learn to live with it. He was not a weapon to be wielded, a threat to be neutralized, or an asset to be managed. He was just someone trying to figure out who he was and what he was supposed to do in this strange world. Serzech studied him for a long time. The silence stretched, pregnant with calculations and reassessments. Then the Satan nodded, his expression unchanged, but something in his eyes shifted. It was not anger, it was not even disappointment. It was the recognition of a variable he could not control and a reluctant, grudging respect for the one who had introduced it. The meeting ended with a decision. Serzech would accelerate the 3-faction peace summit, moving it forward by several months. If Naruto's existence was going to destabilize the political landscape, then the best defense was to solidify the alliances that kept the peace intact before anyone could exploit the anomaly. Serzech departed the sealed chamber without another word, his form dissolving into a swirl of crimson light. The wards flickered once and then went still. Naruto stood alone in the silence, his hand pressed against his chest. The echo was still warm, still steady. But there was a thread of cold woven through it now, a warning that had not yet faded. Whatever had just been set in motion was far from over. The weeks that followed were strange in their ordinariness. Naruto attended classes. He ate lunch on the roof with Issei, who had taken to following him around like a particularly enthusiastic puppy. He failed a math quiz and laughed about it. He visited the occult research club and let Asuya serve him tea while Koneko watched from the corner with unreadable golden eyes. but the ordinary surface concealed a growing tension. Koneko Taoju, the petite silver-haired rook of Rias peerage, had been acting strangely around him. She avoided his gaze. She left rooms when he entered. She flinched when he walked too close, her small hands clenching into fists, her shoulders rigid. At first, Naruto thought she simply disliked him. The echo told him otherwise, a low, curious warmth that pulsed whenever she was near, like a question being asked in a language he didn't yet speak. The truth came out in the old gym storage room 3 weeks after Surzetsu's visit. Naruto had gone there to be alone. The room smelled of dust and old sweat, sunlight filtering through high, grimy windows. He was sitting on a stack of mats, his eyes closed, trying to follow the echo's instincts into something that felt like meditation. The door creaked open and Koneko stepped inside. She did not sit. She stood across from him, her small frame trembling with an emotion that took him a moment to recognize. It was not anger, it was fear. The echo surged, a sudden pulse of something that felt almost protective, and Naruto understood. Koneko confronted him with the directness of someone who had been holding something in for far too long. She said he had a yokai inside him. She could feel it through her senjutsu, the power she had suppressed since her sister's death, the power she had sworn never to use again. The echo's presence was like a song she couldn't unhear, a melody that thrummed in her bones every time she was near him. It was awakening something she had buried, and she was terrified. Naruto listened. The echo was silent, but its warmth was a presence that steadied him. He told Koneko about Kurama. Not everything, the memories were still fractured, scattered across his consciousness like shards of a broken mirror, but he remembered enough. He remembered hating the fox for 12 years. He remembered feeling like a monster, like a bomb waiting to go off. He remembered the moment that hate had begun to crack, when he had realized that the beast inside him was just as trapped as he was. And he remembered the partnership that had grown from that understanding. He told Koneko that her senjutsu was not a curse. It was a tool, a part of her lineage, a legacy she had never been taught to use. Her sister's tragedy had come from isolation and fear, not from the power itself. The power was hers to claim if she chose to, and she did not have to face it alone. Koneko's composure shattered. She didn't cry, not yet. But her hands unclenched, and her shoulders dropped, and for the first time since Naruto had met her, something like hope flickered in those golden eyes. She left the storage room with a new weight on her shoulders, the burden of possibility rather than the burden of fear. She was going to start retraining. She was going to face the power she had buried. Naruto sat in the dust and felt the echo purr. Azazel arrived in Ku without fanfare. He simply appeared one morning at 5 a.m., sitting on a bench near the park where Naruto had taken to training alone. The governor of the fallen angels, a man who had lived for millennia and engineered countless schemes, wore a casual black jacket and an expression of genuine scientific curiosity. He had been tipped off by a report from Vali Lucifer, the White Dragon Emperor, who had detected something interesting during the train station incident. Naruto was in the middle of a kata when he noticed the observer. The movements were half muscle memory, half instinct, stances and strikes that his body remembered even though his conscious mind could not place them. He flowed from one position to the next with a fluidity that belied his lack of formal training in this world. The echo guided him, a current of warmth that suggested correction when his form slipped. Azazel watched in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Then he stood, walked onto the practice ground, and remarked that Naruto's energy manipulation was technically impressive and mechanically incorrect. The observation was delivered without mockery. It was the clinical assessment of a scientist examining a fascinating specimen. Naruto, sweating and slightly breathless, regarded the fallen angel with wary curiosity. The echo was alert but not hostile, a low thrum that said this was someone powerful but not immediately dangerous. Azazel sat down on the grass and invited Naruto to do the same. What followed was the beginning of a tentative mentorship. Azazel explained that Naruto's energy, whatever it was, operated on principles that were fundamentally different from anything in the fallen angelic grimoires. But the mechanics of shaping and directing energy were universal, in their own way. He offered to help Naruto learn to consciously feel and control his power, rather than relying on the instinctive surges that had characterized the train station incident. Naruto accepted. The echo's warmth was a quiet vote of confidence. And so, in the pale light of dawn, a Satan's brother and a fallen angel's governor sat on the grass and began to talk about the nature of power. Azazel mentioned, in passing, that a group called the Discordant Choir had begun asking questions about Ku. Radical fallen, old Satan loyalists, extremists who rejected the peace process. They had been quiet for years, but the ripples from the train station had stirred them. Naruto filed the information away, a cold thread winding through the echo's steady warmth. The nights were the hardest. Naruto's dreams were a storm of fragments, a village hidden in leaves, a ramen stand, a team of 3, a silver-haired man reading a book, a waterfall, a battle against a man with black hair and crimson eyes. He woke drenched in sweat, pieces of a life that felt more real than his own heartbeat slipping through his fingers like water. One night, the fracture was worse than usual. He stood on the clubroom balcony, the cold air biting at his skin, his hands gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. The echo was a furnace in his chest, fighting the cold of a memory that had torn through him without warning, a memory of a blonde man dying in the rain, a book, a smile, a failure that felt like it would crush him. He didn't hear Akeno approach. The queen of Rias' peerage, elegant and dangerous, moved like a shadow. She stood beside him at the railing, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Then Naruto asked if it got quieter, the weight of being broken, the noise of grief. He was not looking at her, but he could feel her stillness, the sudden sharp attention of someone who had been asked a question she had never expected to hear. Akeno answered honestly. Some nights, not all, but some. They stood together until dawn, two people who understood that some wounds never fully healed, they just became easier to carry. She did not offer pity. He did not ask for it. It was solidarity, pure and simple, the recognition of one storm chaser by another. When the first light touched the horizon, Akeno's hand brushed against his for just a moment. Then she was gone, and Naruto was alone with the sunrise and the echo's quiet, approving warmth. Vali Lucifer came during a sparring session. 2 days before the raiding game, preparations were set to begin in earnest. The Occult Research Club had been using one of the Academy's outdoor practice fields, warded against mundane observation. Naruto was working with Issei, drilling him on evasion patterns and boost timing. Issei had improved remarkably. He was still lecherous, still easily distracted, but underneath all that was a genuine hunger to protect the people who had given him a second life. The spar was interrupted by a presence. It was not a sound or a movement, it was a pressure, a weight in the air that made everyone freeze mid-motion. Issei's boosted gear flickered, responding instinctively to a threat it recognized. Rias stepped forward, her hand rising. Akeno's lightning crackled. Vali Lucifer emerged from the shadows of the treeline, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. The White Dragon Emperor, wielder of the divine dividing sacred gear, grandson of the original Lucifer. He was smiling, but it was not a friendly expression. It was the smile of a predator who had just found something intriguing. He ignored everyone except Naruto. His eyes, pale and piercing, studied the anomaly with an intensity that made the echo bristle. Vali said nothing. He simply watched. Then Naruto moved, not to attack, but to shift into a defensive kata. Something about Vali's presence triggered an instinct older than conscious thought, and his body responded before his mind could catch up. Energy flared along his limbs, not the controlled flow that Azazel had been teaching, but something wild and unstable. Natural energy, drawn unconsciously from the diffuse ambient fields that permeated the DxD world. For a single heartbeat, Naruto's eyes changed. The blue irises bled orange, the pupils contracted into horizontal slits, and a weight of ancient power flooded the practice field. The pressure was immense, not demonic, not angelic, but something older, something that felt like the earth itself had opened one eye to regard the world. Then Naruto collapsed. Blood streamed from his nose, and the energy shattered, dissolving into nothing. He hit the ground hard, consciousness flickering, the echo roaring a protest he could feel but not translate. Vali's smile widened. It was a feral, hungry expression, the look of a man who had just confirmed a theory he had been nursing. He did not approach. He did not speak. Instead, he raised one hand and traced a sigil in the air, a glowing symbol that hung for a moment before burning itself into the grass. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as silently as he had come. The sigil pulsed with cold light, its meaning clear to anyone who could read the ancient script. It was a challenge, a promise, a declaration that Vali would be waiting when Naruto was whole. Rias and Akeno rushed to Naruto's side. Issei stood frozen, his boosted gear still flickering. The sigil's light slowly faded, but its presence lingered, a brand on the practice ground. Azazel arrived minutes later, drawn by the surge of energy. He took one look at the fading sigil, at Naruto's unconscious form, at the blood staining his upper lip, and his expression hardened. Vali was interested. And in the supernatural world, the interest of the White Dragon Emperor was rarely a good thing. It was very, very not good. That night in the basement of the Orc building, Rias convened an emergency meeting. Azazel briefed them on what little he knew about the discordant choir, a splinter faction of fallen extremists and old Satan loyalists who rejected the peace process and sought to plunge the supernatural world back into open war. They had gone dormant after the last ceasefire, but the ripples from Naruto's energy were waking old ambitions. Agents had been traced to Ku's outskirts. Kohath, their leader, was a cold-eyed fallen who had once been one of Azazel's most promising students before his radicalism had consumed him. Naruto, still pale but conscious, listened in silence. The echo was a cold weight in his chest, the warning instinct sharper than ever. He had refused Surzetch's protection because he didn't want to be anyone's peace. But the game was already being played, and he was standing in the middle of the board whether he liked it or not. Somewhere in the darkness, the sigil volley had left continued to pulse, a patient heartbeat waiting for an answer. The shattering of glass echoed through the old gym storage room, a sharp crack that made everyone flinch. Koneko stood frozen in the center of the converted training space, her small hands still extended, her golden eyes wide with something between shock and terror. The window behind her had fractured into a spiderweb of crystalline lines, and the floorboards beneath her feet groaned with fresh warping. It was the third slip in 2 weeks. Naruto lowered his guard, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. Across the room, Issei exchanged an uneasy glance with Asya, who clutched her hands together in worry. Rias observed from near the door, her arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. Only Akeno seemed unfazed, her perpetual slight smile never wavering, though her violet eyes tracked every twitch of Koneko's trembling fingers. Koneko's voice came out smaller than usual, barely above a whisper. She said she was fine, that she could control it, that they should continue the session, but her hands would not stop shaking. Naruto walked toward her, each step deliberate and unthreatening. He had seen this before, not exactly this, but close enough. The way Gaara's sand had trembled before it struck. The way the Kyuubi's chakra had leaked through his own skin like venom before he learned to work with it instead of against it. Power that had been locked away too long had a way of demanding release, and suppression only made it hungrier. He stopped an arm's length from Koneko and crouched slightly to meet her eyes. He told her they were done for the day. She started to protest, her pride flickering behind the fear, but he cut her off with a shake of his head. Training while rattled was how mistakes became disasters. She needed rest and something sweet to eat. Those were the rules. The corner of Koneko's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. She nodded. The tension in the room eased by a few degrees, but as the peerage filed out, Rias caught Naruto's eye and held it. Her expression said what her voice did not. This was getting worse, and they both knew it. 3 days later, the basement training room of the old school building had been reinforced with wards that Azazel had personally drawn into the concrete. They pulsed with a faint blue luminescence, containment barriers designed to absorb stray magical discharge. Koneko had been reluctant to train in a space that felt like a cage, which was precisely the problem. Naruto understood that reluctance too, and he told her so. A cage was a cage, no matter how many runes you carved on the bars. But sometimes you needed one to keep others safe while you learned to break free. Koneko sat cross-legged in the center of the ward circle, her eyes closed, her breathing measured. Naruto knelt across from her, close enough to feel the subtle shifts in her energy. The echo stirred in his chest, a low rumble of awareness that translated into a sensation of watching. Kurama's echo always paid attention during these sessions, drawn by something in Koneko's senjutsu that resonated with its own ancient nature. She had been working with Naruto for nearly 3 weeks now, ever since their conversation in the storage room. Progress had been slow and jagged. On good days, Koneko could reach out with her senses and feel the ambient natural energy that hung in the air like invisible mist. She could touch it, hold it, let it flow through her meridians without losing herself. On bad days, the power surged violently, lashing out at anything nearby. Today felt different from the start. The air in the basement was heavier, charged with a static pressure that made the wards hum. Koneko's brow furrowed in concentration, and a faint shimmer of green energy began to outline her form. Naruto felt the echo shift, a spike of alertness that made his own muscles tense. Rias stood near the stairs with Akeno at her side. Issei and Asya watched from the far wall, close enough to help but far enough to run. The peerage had learned to read the signs. When Koneko's energy started to bleed black at the edges, everyone knew trouble was coming. The black crept in slowly at first, threading through the green like ink through water. Koneko's breathing hitched. Her fingers curled into fists against her knees, and her expression twisted from concentration into something pained. Naruto spoke her name low and steady, but she did not respond. Her eyes snapped open, and the gold irises were ringed with crimson. The echo snarled. Naruto heard it clearly for the first time, not words, but a distinct emotional transmission that cut through the static. Danger. The beast inside her was breaking its chains. Then Koneko screamed. The sound was not entirely human. It carried harmonics that vibrated in the bones, a Nekashu's hunting cry that triggered every primal instinct in the room. Black energy exploded outward from her body in a concussive wave. The wards flared brilliant blue, absorbing the first surge, but cracks spidered across their surfaces. A second pulse followed the first, stronger, and one of the containment runes shattered with a sound like a gunshot. Koneko rose to her feet, but the motion was wrong, too fluid, too predatory. Her small frame seemed larger somehow, shadowed by an outline of something vast and feline. Her features had sharpened, her canines lengthened, and her aura had become a corrosive black that ate at the edges of perception. The Nekashu instinct that her sister had surrendered to, the power that had driven Kuroka to madness and murder, was flooding through Koneko's veins. Issei shouted her name, starting forward. Rias grabbed his arm and hauled him back with a strength that belied her elegant frame. She knew as well as Naruto did that approaching a rampaging senjutsu user without a plan was suicide. Asia's hands were already glowing with twilight healing, but healing magic was useless against possession of the self. Naruto did not retreat. He felt the echo expand against his ribs, a pressure that was not painful but urgent. The sensation translated into a demand, act now or lose her. The black energy was Koneko's senjutsu corrupted by years of fear and suppression, a power that had never been taught balance and had turned inward to devour its wielder. It had to be grounded. It had to be purified, and there was exactly one way Naruto knew how to do that. The natural energy in the DxD world was thinner than what he remembered from the elemental nations, diffuse and elusive like trying to breathe at high altitude. But Azazel's training had taught him to feel it, and the echo had learned to reach for it. He had been practicing in secret, late at night when no one was watching, guided by muscle memory that predated his conscious recall. He had never managed to hold the state for more than a few seconds. He had never tried with a clear purpose. There was no time to think about failure. Naruto closed his eyes and reached. The natural energy resisted at first, slipping through his grasp like water through fingers. Then the echo roared, a surge of heat and will that acted like a magnet, and the energy snapped toward him. He felt it flood his meridians, raw and powerful, and for one terrifying moment he thought he had miscalculated. Energy was foreign in ways he could not articulate, structured differently than the chakra pathways of his old body. It burned, it fought him, then something clicked. The echo's presence wrapped around the invading energy and stabilized it, a framework of ancient instinct that knew how to channel what Naruto's conscious mind could not. The pain did not vanish, but it became manageable, a pressure rather than an agony. Naruto opened his eyes. The world had changed. Colors were sharper. Sounds had texture. He could feel every heartbeat in the room, Rias' racing pulse, Issei's adrenaline spike, Asia's terrified flutter, Akeno's controlled tension. He could sense the life energy of everyone present as clearly as if they were standing in sunlight. And he could feel Koneko, not just her body but the shape of her soul, the knot of trauma at its center, the black roar of corrupted senjutsu that was drowning her from within. Orange pigment ringed his eyes. His pupils contracted into horizontal slits, and the air around him crackled with pressure, not demonic, not angelic, but ancient, primal, the weight of the earth itself focusing its attention on a single point. Naruto moved. His speed was not blinding, but it did not need to be. He crossed the distance to Koneko in 2 strides, and the black energy that should have burned him parted around his body like smoke before wind. He grabbed her wrists. The contact was deliberate, skin to skin, a conduit for what needed to happen next. The sage energy flowed from his hands into her arms, a current of pure natural power that cut through the corruption like a blade. Koneko screamed again, but this time the sound was different, pained but lucid, the cry of someone surfacing from deep water. The black energy fought back, desperate and spiteful, but sage mode was the antithesis of corrupted nature. It did not destroy, it purified, it grounded. It returned what had been twisted to its original balance. The shadows around Koneko began to recede. Her features softened, the predatory sharpness fading. The crimson rings in her irises bled back to gold. Her knees buckled, but Naruto held her upright, pouring more energy through the contact point, draining himself to stabilize her. The echo bore the weight with him, a silent partner in the work. 47 seconds. He counted them somewhere in the back of his awareness, a part of his mind that remained clinical even as the rest of him strained to the breaking point. 47 seconds of sustained sage mode, channeling power that his body was never designed to hold, burning through his reserves at a rate that would have been fatal without the echo's support. On the 48th second, his nose began to bleed. On the 49th, his vision blurred. On the 50th, he let go. The sage energy dissipated like mist in sunlight. The orange rings faded from his eyes, the slitted pupils rounding back to normal. Koneko collapsed against him, conscious but trembling, her small body racked with sobs. Naruto wrapped his arms around her on pure instinct, the way he had once held Konohamaru after a nightmare, the way Iruka had held him when he was small and scared and full of poison he did not understand. His consciousness dimmed. The last thing he heard before darkness swallowed him was Koneko's voice, cracked and weeping, saying his name over and over. He woke to the sound of rain. The infirmary ceiling was white and unfamiliar. The sheets were soft and smelled faintly of lavender. His body ached in ways that felt deeply personal, as if every muscle had been individually punished for its audacity. His nose had been cleaned, and someone had changed his clothes. The echo was quiet, but not the absence of presence, more like a predator resting after a hunt, conserving its strength. Then a voice spoke inside his head. It was gruff and deep and unmistakably sardonic. "Good job, partner, finally getting it, brat." Naruto stopped breathing. The voice continued, tinged with something that might have been amusement. "What, nothing to say? After all that effort, you're just going to lie there like a landed fish?" Naruto's hands began to shake. He knew that voice. He knew it better than his own heartbeat, better than the shape of his name. It was the voice that had rumbled in the back of his skull for 17 years, the voice that had mocked him and saved him and fought beside him against a goddess. It was Kurama, not the full Kyuubi, not the raging beast that had once been his prison, but his partner, his other half, the fox who had given everything in the final battle and faded with a promise Naruto had never been able to forget. He tried to speak aloud and failed. The words caught in his throat and came out as a choked sound that was half laugh and half sob. Tears spilled down his cheeks, hot and unstoppable. He did not try to hide them. Kurama's echo made a sound that was somewhere between a huff and a purr. The emotional weight behind the sensation was unmistakable. "Don't get all weepy on me, brat. I just got my voice back. Don't make me regret it." Naruto laughed then, a wet and broken sound that hurt his ribs and felt better than anything had in months. He asked if Kurama remembered. The response was immediate, a wave of warmth that carried ancient fondness. "Of course I do, I remember everything. It's your memory that's been scrambled, not mine. I've been waiting for you to catch up." "How long?" Naruto asked silently. How long had Kurama been awake and aware, trapped behind the fog of Naruto's fractured recall? Since the station. "When that stray devil woke me up, I could feel you but I couldn't reach you. Took that sage stunt to finally clear the channel." The echo's tone shifted, gruffer. "Don't do that again without proper preparation. Your body's still integrating. You could have burned out your pathways completely." Naruto closed his eyes and let the tears fall. He did not care about pathways or preparation or the danger. Kurama was here. Kurama remembered. Kurama was with him, and that meant this strange new world was not as empty as it had felt the day before. A soft knock sounded at the infirmary door. Naruto wiped his face with the back of his hand and called out that it was open. Koneko entered first, her footsteps hesitant. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear, her expression a complicated mixture of guilt and gratitude, and something that looked almost like hope. Behind her came Rias and Akeno, then Issei and Asya, the entire peerage filing into the small room until there was barely space to stand. Koneko stopped at the foot of the bed. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. Her voice was small but steady. She thanked him. She said she had felt herself slipping, felt the same darkness that had consumed her sister closing in, and then there had been light. Orange light, warm light, and a voice that told her to hold on. Naruto blinked. He had not spoken during the grounding. The words must have come from somewhere else, from the energy itself, or from the echo, or from whatever bond had formed between them during those 50 seconds. Koneko's composure cracked. Her shoulders shook, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She said she had been afraid of her own power for so long that she had forgotten it could be anything but a curse. Kuroka had fallen because no one had been there to teach her balance, because senjutsu was a lonely path in a world that feared yokai. Koneko had spent years believing the same fate was inevitable. Naruto pushed himself upright, ignoring the protest of his muscles. He told Koneko that inevitability was a lie people told themselves to avoid the work of change. Her sister's tragedy was not her destiny. Power inside her was a legacy, not a curse, and she had just proven she could survive its worst. The next step was learning to wield its best. Koneko stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised everyone in the room. She stepped forward and hugged him. The motion was awkward, clearly unpracticed, but fierce in a way that words could not match. Naruto hugged her back, and the echo radiated a sensation of approval, a warmth that translated to something like, "Well done, brat." The aftermath unfolded across the supernatural world, like ripples from a stone dropped into still water. In a laboratory deep within the fallen angel's territory, Azazel sat hunched over a desk covered in notes and arcane instruments. His pen moved furiously across parchment, recording every detail he had been able to glean from his wards and his observations. The words "sage mode" were underlined 3 times in thick black ink. Beside them he wrote, "Energy classification, pre-systemic, nature-derived, previously undocumented." The user achieved direct spiritual stabilization of a corrupted senjutsu wielder through physical contact and energy transference. Duration approximately 50 seconds. Side effects: nasal hemorrhage, temporary unconsciousness, no permanent damage observed. He set the pen down and stared at the page. The implications were staggering. If natural energy could be harnessed in this manner, if it could purify corrupted systems and restore balance, then the entire framework of magical classification would need to be rewritten. Adjuka Beelzebub was going to hate this. Azazel smiled thinly and reached for a fresh sheet of paper. In a hidden training ground on the outskirts of Kuo, Vali Lucifer received a tight-beam magical message through a sigil that flared to life on his palm. He read the contents, a detailed report on the basement incident, the energy signature, the duration of the transformation, and his lips curved into that same feral smile. The anomaly was fully active. He composed a reply with efficient, clipped language. The message was brief, directed to the scattered cells of the Chaos Brigade that maintained interest in powerful outliers. The White Dragon Emperor had found his next worthy opponent. All observation protocols were to be maintained. No interference was authorized. He would handle this personally. He closed his fist and the sigil shattered into motes of fading light. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of Foxred energy still resonated in his senses, a flavor of power that was utterly unique in his long experience. He was patient. He could wait, but not forever. In the grand citadel of the Gremory domain, Surzech Lucifer received the report through official channels and felt the political ground shift beneath his feet. The incident had been contained within Ku Academy, but containment was a temporary measure. Azazel already knew. Adjuka would know within the hour. The Discordant Choir's agents were still active, and if they connected the dots between the Senjutsu incident and Naruto's capabilities, their interest would escalate from observation to action. He composed a letter to Adjuka, formally requesting an accelerated review of evil peace compatibility standards. He also drafted a message to the Archangel Michael, suggesting that the three-faction peace summit be moved forward by 2 weeks. Every day they delayed was a day the radicals could use to organize. Every day Naruto existed unclassified was a day the fragile political balance grew more unstable. He signed both documents and summoned a courier. The game was accelerating, and he was no longer certain any of them controlled the pace. In a darkened chamber beneath an abandoned cathedral on Ku's outskirts, Kohath received the same report through very different channels. The fallen extremist read the details in silence, his cold eyes tracking each line with predatory focus. The anomaly had demonstrated a power that defied classification, natural energy manipulation, purification of corrupted senjutsu, a transformative state that produced orange pigmentation and slitted pupils. The signature matched the readings from the train station incident. The anomaly was not merely unclassifiable. The anomaly was dangerous, useful potentially if it could be controlled, unacceptable if it could not. Kohath set the report down and addressed the assembled members of the Discordant Choir's inner circle. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had made his decision long before the evidence arrived. The peace summit would bring the faction leaders into a single room. The anomaly would be present, either as Azazel's protege or as the Gremory heir's independent asset. If they could not capture it before the summit, they would destroy it during the proceedings. The chaos would shatter the peace process and plunge the supernatural world back into open war, which was what they had always wanted. What he did not say aloud was the other possibility that coiled in the back of his mind like a serpent. If the anomaly survived, if it continued to grow in power and influence, it might become something that could not be captured or destroyed. It might become a force that could reshape the entire supernatural order, and not in the direction the Discordant Choir desired. Kohath crushed that thought before it could take root. The anomaly was 17 years old, untrained, and only beginning to access its power. It was vulnerable. It was targetable. The time to act was now. The next afternoon, the sun hung high over Ku Academy, and the events of the basement felt almost like a dream. Classes had ended, and students milled through the hallways in the lazy drift of post-academic freedom. Naruto had been released from the infirmary with strict instructions to rest, and a lingering headache that pulsed behind his eyes whenever he moved too quickly. He was leaning against the wall near the main entrance, waiting for Issei to finish gathering his things, when the temperature in the corridor dropped several degrees. The presence that entered the building was unmistakable, a heavy, arrogant weight of demonic power that pressed against the senses like a challenge. Students who had no ability to perceive the supernatural shivered involuntarily and stepped aside without knowing why. The few who could sense energy felt it like a brand against their skin. Arrogance made physical, privilege made manifest. Riser Fennec strode through the front doors with the confident swagger of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. His peerage flanked him, a dozen demons in matching formal attire, their expressions ranging from bored to predatory. Riser himself was immaculate, golden hair perfectly styled, crimson eyes bright with amusement. his uniform tailored to emphasize the athletic build that his family's regeneration maintained indefinitely. He did not stop at the front desk. He did not ask for directions. He walked through Ku Academy as if he owned it, and the insolence of the act was intentional. Every step was a message. I go where I want. I take what I want. There is nothing you can do to stop me. Rias met him in the main hallway, and the tension between them was immediate and electric. Her posture was rigid, her expression controlled, but Naruto could see the way her fingers curled against her palms. Akeno flanked her left, her perpetual smile now sharp-edged and dangerous. Issei emerged from a side corridor and stopped dead, his boosted gear flickering instinctively against his arm. Riser smiled. It was not a kind expression. He produced a folded document from his jacket and extended it toward Rias with a flourish that was intentionally theatrical. The rating game challenge, formal and binding, written on parchment that glowed with magical authentication. Rias took it without looking at it, her eyes never leaving Riser's face. Riser spoke, his voice carrying through the corridor with deliberate projection. He congratulated his betrothed on her recent political maneuvering. He had heard rumors about the unaffiliated anomaly she had been sheltering, the creature that broke evil pieces and defied classification. How enterprising of her, how very like a Gremory to collect oddities. He hoped the anomaly would be present for the rating game. It would make the victory more entertaining. Then he produced a second sheet of paper, a handwritten addendum, and held it up for everyone to see. His smile widened. The terms were simple, he explained. If Rias lost the rating game, their engagement would be consummated immediately with no further delays or appeals. And as a personal favor to his bride-to-be, he would offer her unaffiliated pet a cage in his personal collection. A place of honor, of course. He was not a barbarian. The silence that followed was absolute. Naruto pushed off the wall. His expression was calm, almost pleasant, but the echo's growl rumbled through his chest like distant thunder. He could feel Kurama's instinctive response to the threat, not fear, never fear, but the cold readiness of a predator who had identified a threat and was calculating the most efficient way to eliminate it. Riser's eyes flicked toward him, and something in the Phoenix Air's expression flickered. Just for a moment, just a fraction of a second. He had expected Naruto to be cowed by the display of power, intimidated by the weight of Phoenix authority. What he saw instead was a young man with orange-tinted eyes and a stillness that did not belong on a 17-year-old. The stillness of someone who had faced worse things than arrogant devils and walked away. Naruto did not speak. He did not need to. The echo's presence radiated through his frame, a pressure that was not yet sage mode but carried hints of it, ancient, watchful, utterly unintimidated. Riser's smile tightened at the corners. Ria's voice cut through the tension, cool and formal. She accepted the challenge. The rating game would proceed according to standard protocols, with an oversight committee and a neutral arena. She would not be intimidated, and she would not negotiate under duress. The addendum was insulting and beneath the dignity of either house. Riser laughed. He told her to enjoy her defiance while it lasted. The game would settle everything, as games always did. Then he turned and walked away, his peerage falling into formation behind him, the whole procession sweeping out of the building like a tide retreating. The hallway felt smaller after they left, emptier. The students who had frozen in place began to move again, shaken and confused, not understanding what they had witnessed but knowing on some instinctual level that something terrible had nearly happened. Rias stared at the challenge letter in her hands. Her fingers were trembling just slightly, a crack in the composed mask she had maintained throughout the confrontation. The engagement she had been dreading for years, the cage she had been trying to escape, was now a formal ultimatum. Win or lose everything, including the boy she had protected since childhood, the anomaly who had somehow become something far more important than a political secret. Naruto leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. The echo's earlier growl had settled into a patient rumble, a steady warmth that translated into a question. "What are you going to do, brat?" He already knew the answer. He asked Rias if she needed a neutral observer for the fight. His voice was casual, almost light, but his eyes held hers with an intensity that said he was not asking permission. He was offering support. He was declaring intent. Rias looked up from the letter. Their eyes met across the corridor, and something shifted in her expression, a fracture in the careful political mask, a glimpse of the young woman beneath who had been fighting alone for years and had only recently realized she did not have to. She did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was soft but steady. She said she would like that. She said she would like that very much. And for the first time since Riser's shadow had fallen over her life, Rias Gremory allowed herself to hope. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching the edges of the challenge letter and making the magical signatures gleam. Somewhere outside, Riser's laughter faded into the distance, a ghost of arrogance that still clung to the air. Somewhere deeper in the school, the peerage was regrouping, processing, preparing. Naruto pushed off the doorframe and walked toward Rias. The echo pulsed once, warm and steady against his ribs, a partner's approval, a fox's quiet certainty. The game was coming, and for the first time, all the pieces were on the board. He intended to make sure they landed exactly where he wanted them. The training room bell rang out across the old gymnasium, a clear, resonant tone that cut through the sounds of exertion and heavy breathing. Issei Hyodu landed his first successful boosted counter on a practice target, the sacred gear on his arm flashing crimson as the doubled force shattered the reinforced dummy into fragments. Naruto shouted from the sidelines, his voice carrying equal parts satisfaction and impatience. Took him long enough. Issei doubled over, hands on his knees, sweat dripping onto the battered wooden floor. His breathing came in ragged gasps, and his arms trembled from the strain of channeling the boosted gear's power repeatedly. But there was a grin on his face, wide and disbelieving, the expression of someone who had just discovered they were capable of more than they had ever imagined. Naruto walked over, stepping around the debris of the destroyed dummy. His footsteps echoed in the cavernous space, and the echo stirred beneath his ribs, a thrum of approval that translated into a simple sensation. Not bad, the brat has potential. He had been drilling Issei for 2 weeks straight, ever since Riser Fenix had delivered his ultimatum and the rating game had been formally scheduled. The training sessions were brutal by design. Naruto pushed Issei harder than anyone had ever pushed him, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The rating game would not be a street brawl or a schoolyard scuffle. It would be a tactical engagement against a peerage that had trained together for decades, led by a Fenix who had never known defeat. Issei straightened up, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. He asked Naruto if he really thought they had a chance against Riser's team. The question was not asked with despair, but with a kind of raw honesty, the vulnerability of someone who had died once already and was still learning what it meant to live again. Naruto considered the question for a moment. The echo pulsed thoughtfully against his consciousness, a complex weave of assessment and instinct. Riser's peerage had experience, power, and the arrogance that came from both, but arrogance was a weakness. Predictability was a weakness. And Issei, for all his flaws, was anything but predictable. He told Issei the truth. They had a chance if Issei stopped thinking like a pervert in the middle of a fight. Every time he got distracted, every time he lost focus because of something stupid, he handed his opponent an opening. The boosted gear was one of the most powerful sacred gears in existence, but it was useless if its wielder could not maintain concentration for more than 30 seconds at a time. Issei winced but did not argue. He had learned over the past 2 weeks that Naruto's criticism was never meant to wound. It was direct, sometimes painfully so, but it came from a place of genuine investment. Naruto was not trying to tear him down. He was trying to build him up piece by piece into someone who could survive what was coming. Naruto continued, outlining the core principles he wanted Issei to internalize. Be where the enemy did not expect him to be. Make the boost timing a rhythm they could not predict. Use the environment, use misdirection, use every tool available. A battle was not just about who hit harder. It was about who controlled the flow of engagement, who dictated the terms, who forced the opponent to react rather than act. Issei nodded slowly, his expression shifting from exhaustion to determination. He had been hearing variations of this advice for 2 weeks, but something about today's session had made it click. The boosted counter had been proof of concept, a tangible demonstration that Naruto's methods were not just theory. They worked. The training room door creaked open, and Kiba Yuuto stepped inside, his practice sword resting across his shoulder. He had been running his own drills in the adjacent room, refining the speed techniques that were the cornerstone of his combat style. He asked if they were done breaking the equipment, his tone light but his eyes sharp with interest as he surveyed the destroyed dummy. Naruto grinned and said they were just getting started. Kiba's presence was a reminder of the larger effort underway. Every member of Rias' peerage had thrown themselves into preparation with intensity that bordered on obsession. Koneko had resumed her senjutsu training, the breakthrough during her rampage having unlocked something she had suppressed for years. Akeno had been refining her lightning magic with a focus that spoke to something personal, something beyond the upcoming game. Even Rias herself had been pushing her power of destruction to new limits, the crimson energy crackling around her during practice sessions with a ferocity that made the air itself recoil. They were all preparing, they were all afraid, and they were all refusing to let that fear paralyze them. The afternoon session continued. Issei practiced his movement patterns, learning to incorporate the boost in irregular intervals that would make it harder for opponents to anticipate. Naruto called out instructions, occasionally stepping in to demonstrate a technique or correct a stance. The echo provided a running commentary, its observations sharpened by centuries of combat experience that Naruto could only partially access. By the time the session ended, Issei was exhausted but visibly improved. His movements were smoother, his decisions faster, his understanding of tactical positioning light years beyond where it had been when they started. He still had a long way to go, but the foundation was solid. As they packed up the equipment, Issei asked Naruto a quieter question. He wanted to know how Naruto had learned all this. The tactical sense, the adaptability, the ability to read opponents and exploit weaknesses. It did not seem like something someone just picked up. Naruto paused, his hand resting on a practice weight. The echo stirred, and for a moment he felt the ghost of other training grounds, other mentors, other battles fought under different skies. A silver-haired man with a lazy eye and a genius for strategy. A toad sage who had taught him to harness the energy of the world itself. Countless skirmishes, missions, wars. The memories were still fragmented, still returning in waves rather than a steady stream, but the instincts they had forged were fully intact. He told Issei that he had good teachers. And that he had made a lot of mistakes, the kind that got people hurt if you survived them. The best lessons came from failure, not success. Issei absorbed this in silence, and something in his expression shifted. Respect, maybe, or a deeper understanding of who Naruto actually was. The goofy, ramen-obsessed transfer student was a mask, or at least only part of the truth. Beneath it was someone who had seen things, done things, carried things that most people could not imagine. They left the training room together, stepping out into the late afternoon sunlight. The academy grounds were quiet, the regular students long gone. Somewhere in the distance, a club activity was wrapping up, voices carrying on the breeze. It all felt so normal, so mundane, completely at odds with the supernatural conflict brewing beneath the surface. The night brought a different kind of preparation. Naruto sat on the roof of the old school building, his legs dangling over the edge, the stars bright overhead. The echo was quiet, a steady warmth that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. He had been coming up here more often lately, drawn by the silence and the open sky. It was one of the few places where he could think without interruption. The door behind him opened and soft footsteps approached. He did not need to turn around to know who it was. The echo had already identified her presence, a flicker of recognition that came with a complex emotional signature. Respect, caution, something that might have been protectiveness. Akeno Himejima sat down beside him, her elegant posture somehow making the edge of a rooftop feel like a throne. She did not speak immediately. She rarely did during these late-night encounters. There was an understanding between them, forged during that first conversation weeks ago. That silence was sometimes more meaningful than words. They had met like this several times now, on nights when sleep was elusive and the weight of their respective pasts pressed too heavily to bear alone. Naruto had learned, piece by piece, the truth of Akeno's heritage. The daughter of a human woman and a fallen angel, born with both holy and demonic power tangled in her blood. The trauma of her mother's death, the hatred she carried for her father, the way she had buried her fallen side so deeply that using holy lightning felt like a betrayal of herself. Tonight she broke the silence first. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. She asked him how he carried it, the weight, the grief, the things that had happened to him that he never talked about but that she could see in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Naruto looked at the stars for a long moment. The echo pulsed, a sensation that was half encouragement and half warning. This was fragile ground. Akeno was not asking out of idle curiosity. She was asking because she was drowning in her own weight and needed to know if survival was possible. He told her about Jiraiya, not the full story, not yet. The memories were still too fractured, the emotions too raw, but he told her enough. The old pervert who had trained him, who had believed in him when no one else did, who had died alone in the rain fighting an enemy he could not defeat. The way Naruto had carried that loss, the guilt of not being there, the responsibility of living up to a legacy that felt impossibly heavy. And he told her that he still smiled, not because the grief went away, but because Jiraiya was still with him. In every lesson he remembered, in every choice he made, in every person he protected. The dead did not leave you. They became part of you, woven into the fabric of who you were, and carrying them was not a burden. It was a privilege. Akeno's eyes glistened in the starlight. She did not cry, not yet, but something in her carefully maintained composure cracked. She said she had never thought of it that way. Her mother's death, her father's abandonment, the power she had inherited, she had always seen them as wounds, as things that had broken her. The idea that they could be something else, something that made her stronger rather than diminished, was almost too much to process. Naruto turned to look at her directly. His voice was gentle but firm. He told her that her father's light was still in her no matter what else. The holy lightning she could summon, the power she had tried to bury, it was not a curse. It was a legacy, one she could choose to embrace or reject, but denying it would not make it disappear. Akeno's breath caught. A single tear traced down her cheek, then another. She had spent years hating the fallen half of herself, seeing it as the source of all her pain. No one had ever told her that it could be something else, something good, something worthy. She wept quietly, the tears falling into the darkness below the rooftop. Naruto did not try to comfort her with words or gestures. He simply sat beside her, a steady presence, letting her cry without judgment or pity. The echo's warmth spread through his chest, a quiet approval. The brat had said the right thing. When Akeno's tears finally subsided, she looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Open, unguarded. The sadistic mask she wore like armor had fallen away completely, revealing the wounded woman beneath. She thanked him, just 2 words, but they carried the weight of years of suppressed pain finally beginning to release. Naruto nodded and looked back at the stars. He told her that some nights were still hard, that the memories still came sometimes and left him gasping. But the nights got fewer and the weight got easier to carry. She would find her way. She was stronger than she knew. They sat together until dawn, speaking occasionally but mostly sharing a comfortable silence. When the first light of morning crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Akeno stood. She looked down at Naruto, and there was something new in her eyes. Determination, hope, the first fragile tendrils of self-acceptance. She said she would see him at training. Then she walked away, her steps lighter than they had been in years. The echo rumbled in Naruto's mind, its voice carrying a note of gruff approval. She was going to be all right, eventually. Took her long enough. Naruto smiled and stayed on the roof a little longer, watching the sunrise. That afternoon, Asia Argento found Naruto in the courtyard behind the main building. She approached hesitantly, her hands clasped together in front of her, her expression anxious. She had been looking for him, she said. She wanted to ask him something. Naruto gestured for her to sit on the bench beside him. The echo's attention sharpened, curious. Asia was one of the few people who triggered a purely protective response from the fox, a reaction that Naruto had come to recognize as Kurama's equivalent of adopting a stray kitten. Asia sat, her posture stiff with nervousness. She was still adjusting to life as a devil, still carrying the weight of her excommunication from the church, still struggling with the theological implications of her healing powers. She had been told, by the institution she had devoted her life to, that healing a devil was a sin, that her gift, the one thing she had always believed was sacred, was actually heresy. She asked Naruto if he thought she was wrong, if her healing was really something evil like the church said. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Naruto felt his heart clench. He had seen this kind of pain before in different contexts, but with the same essential shape. The pain of being told that something fundamental about you was wrong, that the thing you valued most about yourself was a defect, that your kindness was actually corruption. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and spoke with an intensity that made Asia's eyes widen. He told her that her healing was not holy, it was not heretical. It was not a matter of theology or doctrine or supernatural taxonomy. It was simple human kindness. She saw someone hurting and she helped them. That was it. That was the whole truth. No church could take that away from her and no system could make it wrong. He told her she was good at it too, really good. He had seen her work, watched her save a civilian boy who had been caught in the crossfire of a minor devil incident. She had not hesitated, had not asked about the boy's religion or allegiance. She had just healed him because that was who she was. That, Naruto said, was hers, not heaven's, not hell's, hers, and it was worth more than any institutional approval. Asia stared at him, then the tears came, not the quiet weeping of Akeno on the rooftop, but a full cathartic release. She cried because someone had finally seen her, not as a former nun or a heretic or a sacred gear user. As a person whose fundamental nature was to help others, and who had been told that her nature was sinful. Naruto let her cry. When her sobs began to subside, he reached over and patted her head awkwardly, a gesture that was more reflexive than calculated. Asia laughed through her tears, a watery sound that was half relief and half disbelief. She said she had never thought of it that way. All her life, she had defined herself by the institutions she belonged to, the church, and now Rias' peerage. The idea that her identity could exist independently, that her worth was inherent rather than assigned, was revolutionary. Naruto smiled and told her to remember it. The systems around her would change and people would try to define her, but the core of who she was, the girl who healed because she could not bear to see suffering, that was permanent, unchangeable, sacred in a way that had nothing to do with gods or devils. Asia nodded, her tears finally stopping. She looked at Naruto with something approaching awe, as if he had given her a gift she did not know how to repay. He had, in a sense. He had given her permission to be herself. The echo purred in his chest, a deep, satisfied rumble. The brat was getting better at this. Maybe there was hope for him after all. Naruto mentally told the fox to shut up. Kurama's laughter echoed through their shared consciousness, warm and familiar. The briefing happened 3 days before the raiding game. Azazel had requested a private meeting with Rias and Naruto, specifying that the information he needed to share was sensitive enough that even the rest of the peerage should not be present until they decided how to disseminate it. They gathered in the Orc clubroom after hours, the windows sealed with privacy wards, the air heavy with tension. Azazel did not waste time with pleasantries. He spread a map of Ku across the table, marked with glowing sigils that indicated recent movement patterns. His expression was grim, the usual scholarly curiosity replaced by something harder. The discordant choir had been traced to Ku's outskirts. A cell of operatives, led by a fallen named Kohath, had established a staging area in an abandoned industrial complex 3 miles from the academy. Naruto studied the map, his eyes tracing the sigil patterns. The echo stirred, a cold ache that meant danger. It recognized the name Kohath, or at least the type, a fanatic. Someone who had committed so completely to a cause that they could not be reasoned with, only stopped. Azazel continued his briefing. The discordant choir was a coalition of old Satan loyalists and extremist fallen angels who rejected the peace process entirely. They viewed the current order as a betrayal of their respective factions' true purposes. The devils among them wanted a return to the eternal war, the glory days of conquest and dominion. The fallen wanted to tear down the current hierarchy and rebuild it in their own image. Their alliance was unstable, held together by mutual hatred rather than shared vision, but that made them more dangerous, not less. A desperate coalition was more likely to take extreme action, and their target, Azazel said, was the rating game. Ria's face went pale. She asked if they intended to attack the game directly. The Oversight Committee maintained a heavy security presence at all formal matches, Archdevil-class wards, detection grids, a full squad of impartial enforcers. An assault on the game would be suicidal. Azazel shook his head. A direct assault was not their plan. The discordant choir's intelligence network had identified a weakness in the game's security architecture. The Oversight Committee allowed a limited number of guest observers, neutral parties, faction representatives, family members of the participants. The vetting process for these observers was thorough, but it was not infallible. A sufficiently determined infiltrator with the right resources could exploit the system. The choir, Azazel explained, had identified a minor official within the committee's administrative staff who was vulnerable to bribery. This official had the authority to approve guest observer credentials for individuals who, on paper, appeared legitimate. If the choir could get their operatives into the observation deck, they would be positioned near the boundary where non-combat personnel like Asya were stationed. The intent was twofold: capture Naruto during the chaos of the match, using the game's own rules to isolate him from the peerage. Or failing that, assassinate a high-value observer, a faction ambassador, a council member, someone whose death would inflame tensions and derail the peace process entirely. Either outcome served the choir's purpose. Naruto listened in silence, his expression unreadable. The echo was absolutely still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. Kohath planned to use the game as cover, to exploit the rules that Rias was bound by, the structure that was supposed to ensure fairness, and turn it into a weapon. Rias asked if they could alert the Oversight Committee. Surely if the committee knew about the compromised official, they could purge the infiltrators before the game began. Azazel's expression darkened. The problem was political. The peace summit was a delicate thing, balanced on mutual suspicion and the fragile hope that centuries of warfare could finally end. If the Council's security forces were seen intervening in a formal raiding game, even to prevent an attack, it would be interpreted as overreach. The old guard in all 3 factions would seize on it as proof that the Council was consolidating power, that the summit was a trap, that the peace was a lie. The summit might collapse before it even began. He could not intervene officially. Neither could Surzetz or Michael or any of the faction leaders who supported the peace. They had to maintain the appearance of neutrality, even if it meant letting a threat slip through. But unofficial intervention, Azazel said, his eyes meeting Naruto's, was a different matter. Naruto understood. He was not a member of any faction. He was not bound by the political constraints that tied everyone else's hands. He was the anomaly, the unclassifiable variable, and that meant he could act when no one else could. He asked Azazel what he needed to do. Azazel smiled, a thin expression that held no humor. He said he needed Naruto to be where the choir did not expect him to be, to intercept them before they could reach their targets. To neutralize the threat without triggering the political fallout that official action would cause. In other words, Azazel said, he needed Naruto to be a ghost. The echo pulsed with something that felt like anticipation. It had been too long since they had fought a real battle, a conflict with stakes that mattered. The raiding game was a contest. This was something else. This was protection, pure and simple, and it resonated with something fundamental in both of them. Naruto nodded. He told Azazel he would handle it, but he needed more information, the identities of the infiltrators, their expected positions, the timing of their insertion, and he needed the committee's official rules on non-participant intervention. Azazel raised an eyebrow, asked why the rules mattered if Naruto was already planning to break them. Naruto shook his head. He was not planning to break the rules, he was planning to use them. Every system had loopholes, exceptions, gray areas that could be exploited by someone who understood the architecture. The Oversight Committee had rules about non-participants interfering with the match, but they also had rules about the safety of non-combat personnel, about the integrity of the observation deck, about the consequences for external parties who violated the game's terms. If the choir was planning to exploit a loophole, Naruto intended to close it around their necks. Azazel studied him for a long moment, then laughed. It was a genuine sound, startled and amused. He said Naruto had a devious mind for someone so apparently straightforward. It was a compliment, and Naruto took it as one. 3 nights before the game, Naruto stood in the empty training room alone. The Echo was alert, curious, sensing that something significant was about to happen. He closed his eyes and reached for a technique that had been hovering at the edge of his consciousness for weeks, something the returning memories had been whispering about. A jutsu so fundamental to his old identity that it felt like breathing, even though he had not consciously performed it in this life. The hand seal came naturally, his fingers moving through the pattern without conscious direction. Ram. He channeled his energy, the strange, pre-systemic chakra that the Echo provided, and felt it split, half remaining in his body and half projecting outward. There was a puff of smoke, and a second Naruto stood beside him. The shadow clone blinked, looked at its hands, then looked at the original. The sensory link between them was immediate and complete, a doubling of perception that felt like opening a second set of eyes. The clone grinned, a perfect mirror of Naruto's own expression. The Echo's voice rang through both of them simultaneously, startled and impressed. Well, the brat remembered how to do that. Useful, very useful. Because the raiding game was 3 days away and Naruto had just found his loophole. He sent the clone out that night, a silent shadow slipping through Kuo streets toward the dimensional anchor point where the game arena was being prepared. The clone's mission was simple: scout the venue, identify the observation deck's blind spots and entry points, and confirm the timing of the guest observer arrivals. If the choir was planning to use the game as cover, Naruto intended to know the terrain better than they did. The clone moved through the city like a ghost, its chakra signature masked by the natural energy radiating from the Echo. It reached the anchor point, a sealed courtyard behind an old shrine on the outskirts of town, and began its reconnaissance. The observation deck was a raised platform overlooking the dimensional arena, accessible through a series of warded checkpoints. The guest observers would enter through a separate gate, their credentials verified by the compromised official. Once inside, they would be positioned near the non-combatant stations, specifically the healing station where Asya would be stationed during the match. The clone noted everything: the angles, the distances, the security gaps. It traced the likely approach vectors that the infiltrators would use, identified the choke points where they could be intercepted, and calculated the response time for the legitimate security forces once the alarm was raised. Then it discovered something else. Something that made the original Naruto's blood run cold when the sensory link transmitted the information. The guest observer registry included names that should not have been there. The compromised official had not just waived the vetting process for the choir's infiltrators. He had also, at Riser Phoenix's personal request, authorized a set of honored guests whose credentials were technically valid, but whose placement was strategically advantageous. Riser had arranged for Kohath's Fallen to be given observer passes that placed them near the boundary where Asya healed. Riser knew. Maybe not about the assassination plan, maybe not about the choir's broader agenda, but he knew that external operatives were being placed near Rias non-combat personnel. He was complicit, at minimum, in the manipulation of the game's security protocols. The clone dispersed. Naruto opened his eyes in the training room, and the full weight of the clone's intelligence flooded into his consciousness. The Echo's reaction was immediate and volcanic. A surge of heat, a snarl that vibrated through his bones, a sensation of fury that was almost blinding. That arrogant bird-brained bastard, he was cheating. He was deliberately exposing Asya to danger, using the choir's infiltration as a tactical advantage. Whether he understood the full scope of their plan or not, he was culpable. Naruto's expression did not change. His hands, resting at his sides, did not tremble. But something behind his eyes ignited, a flicker of fox-red fire that cast strange shadows on the training room walls. He spoke aloud, his voice calm and cold. He told Kurama that if they wanted a war, he would give them a reason to choose peace instead. The echo's fury settled into something colder, more focused. Approval tinged with a predator's anticipation. The game was coming. Riser thought he had stacked the deck. The choir thought they had found a loophole. But they had all made the same fundamental mistake. They had assumed Naruto would play by their rules. He stood in the empty training room, the last traces of the clone's smoke dissipating around him, and began to plan. The echo's warmth spread through his chest, steady and certain. They had faced worse odds. They had won against enemies who thought themselves invincible, and they had done it by being exactly where no one expected them. The countdown to the raiding game continued. But now Naruto was not just preparing to help Rias win. He was preparing to dismantle a conspiracy, expose a cheat, and protect people who had become something far more important than allies. They had become his. And Naruto Uzumaki had never in any lifetime allowed anyone to threaten what was his. The bell of the training room rang once, a faint echo of the earlier session. Outside, the night was quiet, the stars indifferent to the schemes of devils and fallen angels. But somewhere in the darkness, a shadow clone had already begun to move, and a fox's ancient instincts were calculating every possible outcome. The storm was gathering, and Naruto intended to be the calm at its center. The dimensional bell echoed across the arena, a sound that vibrated through the magical architecture of the pocket dimension. Light bent and warped as the castle materialized, crumbling stone and ancient battlements reconstructing themselves into a maze of corridors, open courtyards, and fortified positions. The raiding game was about to begin. Riser Fennec stood at the center of his deployment zone, wings of golden flame unfurled behind him. His peerage surrounded him, 15 devils arranged in combat formation, their expressions ranging from bored confidence to eager cruelty. His queen, a tall woman with severe features and lightning crackling between her fingers, stood at his right hand. Riser's smirk was the same as always, the expression of a man who had never been forced to question his own superiority. Across the arena, Rias Gremory's peerage was outnumbered and outgunned. Akeno stood at her side, holy lightning dormant but ready. Koneko's fists were clenched, her newly reawakened senjutsu flowing through her limbs in cautious currents. Kiba's hands rested on the hilts of his conjured blades, his posture coiled with anticipation. Issei, armored in his boosted gear, bounced on the balls of his feet, the crimson jewel on his gauntlet pulsing with readiness. Asya waited in the designated non-combat zone, hands folded, her sacred gears healing light flickering around her fingers. In the observation deck above the dimensional field, Naruto watched. His seat was in the VIP section, an acknowledgement of his role as external combat consultant. Beside him, Azazel lounged with a cup of something that steamed, his expression one of academic curiosity barely concealing genuine tension. Ria's mother stood near the window, her face composed, but her hands were white-knuckled on the railing. Surzech observed from a separate platform, his presence a silent reminder of the political stakes attached to this match. The committee head, an elderly devil with ceremonial robes and a perpetually dissatisfied expression, raised his hand. The arena's boundary shimmered, the translucent dome sealing the combatants inside. Riser's voice carried through the magical amplification, a drawl of theatrical confidence. He declared the game would go exactly as he had promised, that Rias would return to the Phoenix estate as his bride, and that her little rebellion had been amusing but ultimately futile. Rias did not answer. Her eyes met her peerage's one by one and she gave a single nod. The committee head's hand dropped. The raiding game began. The first 10 minutes were brutal. Riser's peerage advanced in coordinated waves, their superior numbers allowing them to pin Rias' pieces in isolated pockets. Kiba's speed was matched by Riser's knight, a blade wielder whose technique was less elegant but whose raw power forced Kiba onto the defensive. Koneko found herself squared against two rooks simultaneously, her senjutsu-enhanced strikes cracking stone, but unable to land decisive blows against the coordinated pair. Akeno's lightning arced across the battlefield, but Riser's bishop countered with barriers of golden flame that absorbed the holy energy and redirected it skyward. Ria's power of destruction carved through the castle walls, forcing enemy devils to scatter, but each use drained her, and Riser's strategy was clearly one of attrition. Issei, following Naruto's drilled instructions, refused to be pinned. He moved unpredictably, using the castle's verticality to his advantage. He boosted once, twice, then released a dragon shot that caught Riser's pawns off guard, eliminating two of them in a single blast. He was not winning, but he was surviving, and his survival was forcing Riser's peerage to devote more resources to hunting him than they had planned. Naruto watched the tactical display without blinking. His eyes tracked not the obvious movements but the patterns beneath them. Riser's peerage was not just attacking, they were hurting. They were pushing Rias pieces towards specific coordinates, funneling them into kill zones where the numerical advantage could be maximized. But there was something else. A secondary pattern, one that had nothing to do with the game's tactical objectives. His shadow clone, invisible and intangible, had already confirmed it. The infiltration was in motion. The false distress signal came 23 minutes into the match. A magical flare coded with orc emergency protocols erupted from a corridor just beyond the non-combat zone's boundary. It was too precise, too perfectly timed. Asuya, stationed with the support staff, saw the flare and recognized the signature. Someone was hurt, one of her friends was hurt. She did what anyone with her heart would do. She ran toward the signal. The moment her foot crossed the boundary line, the ambush sprung. 4 fallen angels materialized from concealing wards, their dark wings cutting off her retreat. Their leader, a fallen with ritual scarring across his face and a spear of condensed light forming in his hands, smiled. Kohath's operatives had been patient. They had waited for exactly this moment, when the chaos of the game was at its peak, and Asuya's absence from the non-combat zone would not be immediately noticed. The spear of light rose, aimed at Asuya's chest. The fallen's voice was almost gentle as he told her not to struggle, that her death would serve a greater purpose, that the spark of war required kindling. Asuya's eyes widened. Her hands came up, but she was a healer, not a fighter. She had no defense, she had no escape. The spear descended. And then the clone was there. Naruto's shadow clone materialized between Asuya and the fallen, one hand catching the shaft of the light spear inches from her face. The clone's expression was utterly blank, the controlled emptiness of a Hokage who had seen too many battles to waste energy on rage. The fallen leader had time to register surprise, his eyes widening as the clone's grip closed around the weapon. Then the clone moved. The first fallen went down in 2 seconds. A strike to the throat collapsed his windpipe. A palm to the chest sent a pulse of chakra through his sternum, disrupting the flow of his own energy and dropping him unconscious. The spear, wrenched from his grip, spun in the clone's hand. The second fallen, a woman with wings of mottled gray, tried to retreat. The clone's thrown spear took her in the shoulder, spinning her into the stone wall. She crumpled, her own light weapon pinning her in place. The third fallen launched a barrage of light arrows, desperate and wild. The clone wove through them with movements that belonged to a shinobi who had dodged attacks from gods and monsters, closing the distance in a blur. A knee to the solar plexus. An elbow to the temple. The fallen collapsed. The fourth operative, realizing the ambush had failed, turned to flee. The clone appeared in front of him, one hand closing around his throat, not choking but immobilizing. The clone's voice was soft and cold. It informed the fallen that his friends were alive, but that he would not be if he attempted to run. The fallen stopped struggling. 11 seconds had passed. Asuya stared, her hands still raised, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The clone turned to her, and for a moment, its expression softened. It told her to return to the non-combat zone, that she was safe now, and that the people who had tried to hurt her would be dealt with. Asuya nodded, tears streaming down her face, and stumbled back across the boundary line. The clone remained, standing guard over the 4 unconscious fallen, its gaze sweeping the shadows for any additional threats. Then in the arena's center, the real Naruto moved. The match ground to a halt. Naruto stepped into the designated neutral zone, the space between the combatants that was supposed to remain empty, and raised one hand. His voice, amplified by chakra, cut through the noise of battle and the roar of the observation deck's shocked murmuring. He declared that the match was paused, that he was not a participant, but that a girl had been attacked outside the arena's bounds by illegal combatants. He demanded that the oversight committee review the guest registry immediately. Silence fell. The committee head sputtered, his ceremonial robes rustling as he stood, outraged. He demanded to know on what authority Naruto made such an accusation, calling him an unaffiliated outsider with no standing. Naruto did not raise his voice. He simply described the 4 fallen angels currently unconscious in Corridor 7, explained that they had been carrying guest observer passes signed by a committee official, and noted that they had attempted to murder Asuya Argento. He asked the committee head if he wanted to explain how such an oversight had occurred, or if he would prefer that Naruto explain it for him. The silence deepened. Riser in the center of the arena went very still. His smirk did not falter, but something behind his eyes flickered. Calculation, reassessment, the faintest edge of alarm. The committee head's face purpled. He declared that this was absurd, an unprecedented disruption of a formal rating game. But before he could continue his blustering, a new voice cut through the chamber. Ajuka Beelzebub's magical projection materialized above the observation deck, his expression one of cold, detached irritation. He announced that an immediate audit of the guest registry and the game's security protocols would be conducted, and ordered the committee head to stand down. The projection's eyes turned toward Naruto. Ajuka stated that the anomaly had made a serious accusation, and if it proved true, there would be consequences that extended far beyond this match. Naruto met the Satan's gaze without flinching. He replied that the truth would prove itself, and that he was only asking for the rules to be enforced as they were written. Ajax's mouth twitched, something that might have been amusement or might have been irritation. His projection remained silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, acknowledging the point, and ordered the audit to proceed in real time while the game remained paused. The minutes that followed were excruciating. The committee's investigators, their authority suddenly backed by one of the four Satans, moved through the guest registry with brutal efficiency. The compromised official, a mid-level functionary named Orlin, was identified within 4 minutes. His magical signature was all over the unauthorized waivers. His personal communication logs, pulled under emergency authority, revealed a chain of messages with Riser Phoenix's household staff. The arrangement was clear. Riser had requested special guest passes for certain individuals whose credentials were technically valid but whose placement was strategically advantageous. Orlin had complied, accepting a bribe in the form of Phoenix family favors. Whether Riser had known the full scope of Kohath's plan, whether he had understood that the Fallen intended to murder a non-combatant, was unclear. But what was indisputable was that he had deliberately manipulated the security protocols to place external operatives near Ria's support personnel. The committee head, his face now ashen, read the findings aloud. Riser Phoenix was disqualified from the raiding game for external collusion and conspiracy to endanger a non-participant. Rias Gremory was declared the victor by default. The engagement contract was voided, effective immediately. Ria stood frozen, Akeno's hand gripping her arm, tears streaming down her face. Koneko's fists unclenched. Kiba let out a breath he had been holding since the match began. Issei, still in the arena center, stared at the committee head with an expression of dawning, disbelieving joy. Then Riser's queen screamed. The sound was raw, primal, the howl of a warrior who had just watched everything she had fought for collapse. Her name was Miria, and she had served the Phoenix family for 3 centuries, and she had believed with absolute certainty in Riser's inevitable victory. The disqualification did not compute. The rules had been broken, but in her mind that was irrelevant. The strong took what they wanted. The strong did not lose to technicalities. Lightning exploded from her body, a corona of white-hot energy that shattered stone beneath her feet. She launched herself at Rias, her hands extended to kill, her mind consumed by a single, burning imperative. If she could not have victory, she would have vengeance. Naruto moved, but it was not his body that moved. It was the echo. The response was not conscious. It was the instinctive reaction of a being who had protected his host for millennia, who had faced gods and monsters and the end of the world, and who had never, in any lifetime, allowed harm to come to those under his protection. The fox-red aura exploded outward. 9 tails of chakra manifested behind Naruto, each one sweeping through the air with the weight of ancient, incomprehensible power. The color was not the blaze orange of a bijuu's full manifestation. It was deeper, richer, the crimson gold of a fox's fur caught in the last light of sunset. The pressure that accompanied it was not malevolent, it was simply vast. It was the weight of an existence that defied classification, a power that predated the systems of angels and devils and fallen, a presence that was not aligned with any faction because it existed before factions existed. Every combatant in the arena froze. Miria's lightning guttered and died. Her body locked in place, not from paralysis but from the primal bone-deep recognition that she was in the presence of something that could end her without effort. Riser took an involuntary step backward. His wings of flame sputtered, the golden light dimming as if the fox's aura was simply drowning it out. Rias' peerage was motionless, but their stillness was not fear. It was awe. Issei's boosted gear pulsed erratically, the dragon inside it recognizing something ancient and powerful. Akeno's holy lightning manifested unbidden around her fingers, responding to the fox's energy like a string vibrating in sympathy. Koneko's senjutsu flared, her pupils dilating as she felt the natural energy in Naruto's aura wash over her like a warm tide. She whispered his name, her voice breaking. Asya, still trembling in the non-combat zone, pressed her hands together and wept with relief. Naruto's voice was quiet. It carried across the arena not through volume, but through the absolute silence that surrounded it. He told Miria to stand down, that the match was over, and that if the committee did not call it, he would break the arena. The The committee head, his voice cracked and small, formally ended the game. The dimensional bell tolled once, the signal of match conclusion. Riser Fenix's disqualification was recorded in the official logs. The engagement between the Fenix and Gremory families was dissolved. Rias Gremory was free. The Foxred aura faded. The nine tails dissolved into motes of golden light that drifted upward like sparks from a dying fire. Naruto's eyes, which had been ringed with orange pigment and split by horizontal pupils, returned to their normal blue. He swayed once, his hand rising to touch his chest where the echo's warmth was subsiding into something softer, something almost like a purr of satisfaction. Kurama's voice, gruff and unmistakable, rumbled through his mind. The fox noted that had been close and asked if Naruto was trying to give him a heart attack. Naruto's mouth quirked. He replied that the fox didn't have a heart. Kurama retorted that he had a metaphorical one and that Naruto was still a reckless brat who needed to learn to warn him before pulling stunts like that. The banter was easy, familiar, a rhythm they had rediscovered over weeks of practice and memory, but beneath it was something else. Pride. Kurama was proud of him. And Naruto could feel it. In the observation deck, several things happened simultaneously. Azazel set down his cup with a hand that was not quite steady and wrote the words "full manifestation arena suppression" in the notebook he had produced from somewhere inside his coat. Surzech Lucifer allowed himself a single, quiet exhalation, the release of a tension that had been building since the moment Riser challenged his sister. The political calculus had shifted. The anomaly had not only exposed Riser's corruption, he had demonstrated publicly and unmistakably the scope of his power. Every faction observer in the room was now scrambling to update their threat assessments. But the expression on Surzech's face was not concern. It was something closer to gratitude. Riser, disqualified and humiliated, gathered his peerage with a gesture. Miria was still shaking, her eyes wide and unfocused. The other pieces looked at their king with expressions of shock, confusion, and in some cases, dawning disillusionment. Riser did not speak. He did not threaten or bluster or promise retribution. He simply turned and walked toward the arena's exit, his wings retracting, his golden glow dimmed to something that looked almost ordinary. The committee staff began the process of restoring order, their movements hurried and embarrassed. The corrupt official, Orlin, was escorted from the observation deck by two of Surzech's personal guards, his face a mask of terrified pleading. And in the corner of the VIP section, almost invisible in the chaos, a small woman with black hair and dark eyes watched Naruto's aura fade. Ophiz did not move. She did not speak. She simply tilted her head, feeling the residual echo brush against her senses like wind across still water. The noise in her head, the endless roaring of the Great Red's dimensional dominance, dimmed by the smallest fraction, just for a moment, just enough to notice. She whispered a single word, silence. Then she was gone. The aftermath was a blur of embraces and tears. Rias crossed the arena floor at a run, her composure shattering completely as she reached Naruto. She did not speak. She could not. She simply pressed her forehead against his chest, her shoulders shaking, her hands gripping the fabric of his jacket as if he might dissolve if she let go. Akeno arrived a moment later, her eyes wet but her smile radiant. She placed one hand on Ria's back and one on Naruto's arm, and the three of them stood together in the center of the ruined castle while the dimensional boundary flickered and began to deactivate. Koneko approached more slowly, her steps hesitant, but when she reached Naruto, she punched him in the arm. It was not a gentle punch. She told him he was an idiot for scaring her like that, and then she was crying too, her face buried against his side, her senjutsu pulsing with a warmth that had nothing to do with battle. Kiba stood slightly apart, his expression one of quiet, profound relief. He met Naruto's eyes and nodded once, a gesture of respect that contained more meaning than any words could convey. And Issei, still in the arena's combat zone, looked down at his gauntlet and realized it was glowing. The boosted gear had responded to the fox's aura. Not with fear, not with aggression, but with recognition. The dragon inside the sacred gear, D-Drake, had felt something it understood, something primal, something powerful. The crimson jewel pulsed once, twice, and then the energy that had been building inside Issei since the match began finally released. The scale mail materialized around him, not the incomplete version he had managed in training, the half-formed armor that flickered and failed after 30 seconds. This was the full manifestation. The crimson plates locked into place, the wings extended. The helmet sealed over his face, and through the visor, Issei's eyes glowed with something that was equal parts determination and joy. He had not won the fight, but he had found his breakthrough. And in the observation deck, Surzech Lucifer allowed himself to smile. The public address system crackled to life. Adjuka Beelzebub's voice, still cold and precise, announced emergency amendments to the evil peace system, prompted by the classification anomaly known as Naruto Uzumaki. The details would be disseminated to all noble houses within the week, but the summary was clear. The system would be revised to account for beings whose energies fell outside the current taxonomy. New protocols would be established. New compatibility standards would be drafted. The classification crisis that Naruto represented was now official policy. Surzech stepped forward, his voice carrying across the arena. He publicly thanked Naruto for his intervention, acknowledging that the Gremory family and the underworld itself owed him a debt. He then announced that the three-faction peace summit would convene in 1 month, and that the events of this raiding game had only underscored the urgency of that gathering. The factions could no longer afford to operate in ignorance of each other's capabilities, or of the anomalies that existed between their systems. Rias lifted her head from Naruto's chest. Her eyes were red, her cheeks wet, but her expression was one of incandescent, unguarded joy. She told him she was free, her voice breaking on the last word. Naruto looked down at her, and the fox-red fire behind his eyes had softened into something warmer. He replied that of course she was, that she had always been free, and that nobody was ever going to take that away from her again. The promise hung in the air between them, weighted with everything they had been through and everything that was still. Around them, the arena's light began to shift. The dimensional field was powering down. The castle walls, so solid moments ago, were becoming translucent, their edges softening into the neutral architecture of the raiding game chamber. Outside the windows, the underworld's eternal twilight was visible, a sky of deep purple and scattered stars that had witnessed countless games and countless outcomes, but never one quite like this. The peerage gathered together. Rias and Akeno flanked Naruto. Koneko stood close, her senjutsu settling into a steady, peaceful rhythm. Kiba and Issei took positions at the edges of the group. And Asya, who had been brought back from the non-combat zone by Rias Rook, joined them, her hands still trembling but her eyes bright with gratitude. They walked out of the arena together. The door closed behind them. The game was over, but the world had changed. Far beneath Ku Academy, in a basement that did not exist on any human map, Kohath stared at the magical monitor that had been broadcasting the raiding game. The feed had cut out during the Fox's manifestation, the surveillance wards unable to process the pre-systemic energy without corrupting, but he had seen enough. The fallen angels he had sent, his most loyal operatives, were in custody. Riser Fenix, the useful idiot, was disqualified and neutralized as an asset. The anomaly had not only survived the ambush, he had turned it into a spectacle, into a declaration of power. Kohath's fist slammed into the table. The wood cracked, the sound sharp and violent in the enclosed space. His inner circle, 4 fallen angels and 2 stray devils who had thrown their lot in with the discordant choir, watched him with expressions of carefully concealed fear. Kohath's voice, when he spoke, was low and venomous. He declared that if they could not capture the anomaly, they would annihilate the summit. The peace talks would become a funeral. The factions would blame each other, the war would reignite, and Naruto Uzumaki, whether he wanted it or not, would be the spark. He ordered his followers to begin preparations, to contact every sleeper agent and every radical sympathizer. The month until the summit would be spent ensuring that when the 3 factions gathered, they would not leave alive. The inner circle dispersed. Kohath remained alone in the basement, staring at the cracked table, his wings folded tight against his back. In the darkness, he could still see the afterimage of the fox's 9 tails, burning against the inside of his eyelids. The anomaly was more powerful than they had estimated, more controlled, more dangerous, but that only made him more essential to destroy. The silence of the basement was absolute. Outside, the night continued its slow progression toward dawn. But in the underbelly of Ku, the machinery of war had already begun to turn, and Kohath in the dark began to plan. Naruto jolted awake, tears streaking down his cheeks, the last shard of memory finally clicking into place with the force of a physical blow. For a long moment he simply lay there, staring at the ceiling of his apartment as the morning light filtered through the curtains, his chest heaving with the weight of a lifetime suddenly restored. The final valley, the clash of Rasengan and Chidori. Kurama's voice, fading but fierce, telling him to take care of the world. His children's faces, Hinata's smile, the weight of the Hokage hat. It was all there, complete and undiluted, a flood that he had been wading through for months, but that now had finally crested and settled into clear, still water. He remembered everything, his full name, his history, every precious person he had loved and lost and carried with him across the boundary of worlds. And in his soul, a familiar warmth stirred. Kurama's voice, no longer fragmented or distant, rolled through his mind with the comfortable gruffness of an old friend who had been waiting for him to catch up. The fox said it had taken him long enough. Naruto laughed, the sound wet and raw, and sat up in his bed. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and asked if Kurama had been there the whole time. The echo's response was a sensation that felt like a shrug, a ripple of warmth that conveyed patience and a little bit of exasperation. Of course he had been there. He was always there. From the beginning to the end and now beyond even that, they were partners. That did not change just because the world did. In the month that followed, the rhythm of Naruto's life shifted. The fractured weight of half-remembered things was gone, replaced by the solid, familiar presence of a past he could finally hold. Kurama became a constant telepathic companion, their conversations a running undercurrent to every day. They bickered like brothers, the fox's sarcasm a sharp counterpoint to Naruto's relentless optimism. They planned together, weighing the political currents of the supernatural world with the strategic instincts of a Hokage and the ancient cunning of a creature that had seen empires rise and fall. When Naruto ate ramen, Kurama complained about the lack of substance. When Naruto trained, Kurama offered critiques that were both brutal and precise. When Naruto made the girls laugh, Kurama's warmth would pulse in his chest, a silent approval. The loneliness that had defined him for so many months, the sense of being an anomaly adrift, finally began to ease. He was not alone, he never had been. Koneko Tauju stood before her sister's grave in the underworld, the wind carrying the scent of twilight flowers across the quiet cemetery. The stone was simple, well-maintained, and Koneko had brought a pressed bloom from the human world, a small white flower she had dried herself over the past week. She knelt and placed it against the base of the grave marker, her movements deliberate and calm. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady in a way it had not been for years. She told her sister that she was not afraid anymore, that she had started formal senjutsu training under Lady Rias' blessing, and that she had a teacher now, a loud, strange boy who carried a fox inside him and who had shown her that the power in her blood was not a curse but a legacy. She paused, her fingers lingering on the cool stone. She said she wished her sister could have met him. He would have annoyed her probably, but he would have helped her too. When she rose, Koneko's eyes were dry but her expression was soft. She turned from the grave and walked back toward the teleport circle, her senjutsu humming with a quiet, harmonious rhythm. The fear that had caged her for so long was finally silent, and in its place something new was growing. It was 3 in the morning when Akeno Himejima found him on the roof. She had been coming to this place more often lately, the familiar spot where they had shared their first real conversation, the night he had asked her if the wait ever got quieter. Now under the stars, she stood beside him and looked out over the sleeping academy. The silence between them was comfortable, but on this night it was charged with something more. Akeno spoke first. Her voice was quieter than usual, stripped of the teasing lilt she wore like armor. She told him that she had been thinking about her father, about the light she had denied for so long, and about the way he had looked at her when she talked about it. He had not pitied her. He had not tried to fix her. He had simply sat with her in the dark until dawn came, and somewhere in that she had realized she loved him. Naruto turned to face her, his expression gentle but not surprised. He had sensed this was coming. Kurama's warmth in his chest had been nudging him with knowing amusement for days, the fox's dry commentary pointing out the obvious. Naruto told her the truth. He was still figuring out who he was without his old world. His memories had returned, full and overwhelming, and he was carrying the weight of a Hokage's responsibilities across dimensions. He was not ready to be what she deserved, not yet, but he asked her to wait. He said that when he knew himself completely, when he could stand before her without the shadows of 2 worlds tangled in his heart, she would be the first to hear his answer. Akeno studied him for a long moment, her violet eyes glistening. Then she smiled, a real smile, fragile and hopeful, and nodded. She said she could wait. She had already learned that some things were worth the time. They stood together under the stars until the first hint of dawn crept over the horizon, and the promise between them felt as solid as the earth. Rias Gremory's confession came a week later, in the golden hour of an afternoon when the clubroom was empty and the light poured through the windows like liquid honey. She had been reviewing documents for the upcoming Peace Summit, her red hair spilling over her shoulders, but her mind had been elsewhere. When Naruto walked in to ask if she had eaten lunch, she set the papers aside and looked at him with an intensity that made him pause. She told him that she had been a political creature her entire life. She had monitored him from childhood out of fear, hidden his existence from her brother, and measured every relationship through the cold calculus of survival. But he had changed that. He had refused to be classified, refused to be owned, and in doing so he had shown her that the systems she chafed under were not absolute. She had fallen in love with him not because he was powerful or anomalous, but because he was free, and she wanted to be free with him. Naruto listened, his heart aching with the weight of her words. He stepped closer and took her hands in his touch warm and steady. He told her the same thing he had told Akeno. He was still rebuilding himself, still learning to exist in this world without the framework of his past. He could not give her a full heart while it was still scattered across 2 lifetimes. He asked her to wait. Ria's eyes shimmered, but she did not look away. She asked if he would come to her when he was ready. He promised that he would. She squeezed his hands and released them, her composure returning but her smile softer than it had ever been. The promise hung between them, warm and patient, a fire banked but not extinguished. Zenobia arrived with the church envoy 3 days before the summit, and she immediately made her presence known. The former exorcist walked through the halls of Ku Academy with the rigid posture of a soldier, her eyes sharp and her tongue sharper. During a preliminary meeting in the Occult Research Club, she clashed with Kiba over the role of the church in the summit, her words laced with the bitterness of a woman who had lost her faith and found nothing to replace it. Naruto, who had been observing quietly from the edge of the room, listened as her rant escalated into a diatribe against all systems. The church, the devils, the fallen, every institution that had ever failed someone who believed in it. She said faith was a weapon people used against themselves. She said trust was a poison. She said the summit was a farce because everyone in it was already broken. The room was tense, the peerage bristling. Naruto spoke. His voice was calm and even cutting through the heat without raising itself. He said systems did fail people. He had seen it. He had seen villages sacrifice their own children to fear. He had seen nations tear themselves apart over grudges older than memory. But people, he said, did not have to fail each other. People could choose differently. They could stand up in the middle of the wreckage and say that the cycle stopped with them. Zenobia turned to him, her aquamarine eyes narrowing. She demanded to know what he knew about it. Naruto told her he had watched enemies bleed together against a greater darkness. He had watched a world nearly end, and then watched it be saved by the same people who had been trying to kill each other a week before. If they could do it, he asked, why could not she? Zenobia did not answer, but something behind her eyes shifted. She looked away, her jaw tight, and when the meeting ended, she lingered near the door, watching Naruto with a new expression. It was not trust yet, but it was the beginning of a question. The 3-faction peace summit convened in a grand, neutral hall constructed in a dimensional pocket between worlds. The architecture was deliberately ambiguous. Neither the Gothic spires of the underworld, nor the celestial radiance of heaven, nor the weathered beauty of the fallen's floating citadels. It was a space designed to belong to everyone and no one, a careful political statement rendered in marble and light. Naruto attended as Azazel's invited independent observer, a role that placed him on the periphery of the negotiations, but at the very center of countless wary glances. Every faction representative knew who he was. The 9-tailed fox that had frozen an arena full of devils was not something the supernatural world forgot. He took his seat in the observer's gallery, dressed in a simple dark jacket that Azazel had procured for him, and watched as the delegates assembled. Surzech's Lucifer led the devil contingent, his presence regal and carefully neutral. Michael, the archangel, represented heaven with a serenity that belied the tension in his shoulders. Azazel himself spoke for the fallen, his usual irreverence tempered by the gravity of the occasion. And around them, dozens of lesser dignitaries, guards, and aides filled the hall, their collective anxiety a palpable hum. The early debates were predictably fraught. An angel and a devil locked horns over sanctuary boundaries, their voices rising as they rehashed centuries of grievance. The angel argued that devils had no right to establish footholds near sacred sites. The devil countered that heaven's definition of sacred was an ever-expanding claim designed to choke underworld territory. The argument spiraled, drawing in other delegates, and the hall began to fracture along old fault lines. Surzech and Michael exchanged glances, the weight of potential failure heavy in the air. Naruto rose from his seat. The motion drew attention immediately, his anomaly status making him a focal point even in a room full of ancient beings. He stepped down from the gallery and walked to the center of the hall, his footsteps echoing on the marble. The arguing delegates fell silent, confused and affronted by the interruption. Surzech raised an eyebrow but did not stop him. Azazel leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Naruto stopped in the middle of the floor and looked around at the assembled leaders of the 3 great factions. His voice, when he spoke, carried the quiet authority of a man who had once addressed a coalition of 40,000 shinobi on the eve of a world war. He told them a story. He told them about the allied shinobi forces, 5 great nations that had spent generations slaughtering each other over resources, pride, and revenge. He told them about the 4th Great Ninja War, about the moment when those same nations had set aside their hatred and formed a single army because a greater darkness had threatened to consume everything. He told them about enemies who had bled together, who had died for each other, who had stood back to back against a nightmare and refused to break. He described the battlefield, the sound of 100,000 feet marching under one banner, the sight of a man he had once hated fighting beside him as a brother. And then he asked them a simple question. If they could do it, why could not the three factions? The hall was silent. The angel who had been arguing stared at him, her expression caught between indignation and something rower. The devil delegate looked down at his hands. Michael inclined his head, his serene gaze resting on Naruto with an unreadable thought. Surzech allowed himself a small, genuine smile. The tension in the room did not vanish, but it shifted. The argument about sanctuary boundaries was tabled. The delegates returned to their seats and the negotiations resumed with a different tone, less combative, more willing to find the edges of compromise. Then the discordant choir struck. The attack came without warning, a coordinated suicide assault that shattered the hall's dimensional barriers in a cascade of corrupted magic. The outer wards screamed and collapsed, and through the breaches poured a wave of fallen angels and stray devils, their auras blazing with fanaticism. At their head was Kohath, his cold eyes fixed on the central dais where Surzech and Michael sat. His wings were spread wide, black and tattered from years of hiding, and his voice rang out with a declaration that the peace would die here, that the old order would rise from the ashes, that the anomaly would be the spark whether it wanted it or not. The first wave of attackers threw themselves at the guards, their tactics reckless and overwhelming. Explosions ripped through the hall. Dignitaries screamed. The protective barriers around the main delegates flared but began to buckle under the concentrated assault. Kohath himself moved with terrifying speed, a spear of corrupted light forming in his hand as he aimed directly at Surzech's unprotected back. Naruto moved. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, he reached for the ambient natural energy that he had spent months learning to draw. It rushed into him, diffuse and stubborn in this world, but bending to his will through Kurama's steady guidance. Orange pigment ringed his eyes. His pupils contracted into horizontal slits. The air around him exploded with golden light, and behind him the translucent silhouette of a nine-tailed fox rose to its full terrible height. He intercepted Kohath's killing blow before the spear could reach its target. His hand closed around the shaft of corrupted light, and the sage-enhanced grip simply crushed it into dissipating sparks. Kohath's eyes widened in shock and fury. He snarled that the anomaly was too late. The peace was already dead. Naruto did not answer with words. He answered with motion. What followed was a blur of controlled violence. Naruto became a golden nexus of natural energy, his movements a seamless fusion of Hokage-level taijutsu and Kurama's primal power. He struck with open palms and joint locks, incapacitating attackers without killing them. A fallen who lunged at him with a blade found his arm twisted behind his back and a precise blow to the temple sending him unconscious before he hit the ground. A stray devil who tried to tackle him was redirected into a marble pillar, the impact calculated to disable rather than destroy. Kohath kept coming, his madness lending him speed and strength, but Naruto met him again and again, parrying strikes that would have cleaved through steel and responding with counters that left the rogue fallen staggering. Volley Lucifer joined the fight from the left flank, his divine dividing wings spreading as he intercepted a second wave of attackers. His grin was feral, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of battle, but he worked in perfect concert with Naruto's rhythm, covering his blind spots without a word of coordination. Azazel deployed a series of containment spells, trapping the outer ring of attackers in cages of light. Rias' peerage moved as a unit, Issei's boosted gear flaring as he punched a stray devil through a wall, Koneko's senjutsu-enhanced strikes dropping fallen with surgical precision, Akeno's lightning crackling across the battlefield in controlled arcs. In the end, Kohath was on his knees. Naruto stood before him, one hand pressed to the fallen's chest, a Rasengan of pure natural energy spinning inches from his heart, a warning, not a killing blow. Naruto's voice was quiet but carried across the silent hall. He said the war was over, not because the factions had won, but because he refused to let it continue. Kohath's eyes were wild with hatred, but he had nothing left to throw. The surviving attackers were contained. The dignitaries were alive. Surzech and Michael exchanged a long-waited look, and then Surzech raised his hand to declare the summit secure. The peace had held. Aftermath consumed the following hours. The delegates, shaken but resolute, reconvened in a smaller chamber and continued their negotiations with a new urgency. Kohath and his surviving operatives were taken into joint custody, their fates to be determined by a tribunal representing all three factions. Azazel pulled Naruto aside and told him that he had just rewritten the political landscape with his fists. Naruto shrugged and said he had just done what anyone would have done. Azazel laughed, but his eyes were serious. He said that was exactly why the factions were terrified of him. not because of his power, but because he actually believed that. That evening, Vali found him on a training field outside the dimensional hall. The white dragon emperor's wings were still half extended, the light of divine dividing pulsing along their edges. He issued a challenge, not as enemies, not as part of any faction scheme, but because he wanted to test himself against the anomaly at full strength. Naruto looked at him for a moment, felt Kurama's amused rumble in his chest, and nodded. The duel lasted 30 minutes. It was a clash of legends compressed into a single, breathtaking span of time. Naruto's Biju cloak flared around him, the translucent gold of Kurama's chakra wrapping his body in a protective shroud, 9 tails sweeping behind him like banners of fire. Vali's divine dividing wings beat the air, each stroke having the distance between them, his speed defying physics as he pressed the attack with a relentless series of blows. They moved across the field in a dance that blurred the line between combat and art. Naruto's strikes were precise and powerful, the muscle memory of 1,000 battles guiding his fists. Vali's counters were elegant and brutal, his sacred gear draining the energy from Naruto's attacks and feeding it back as amplified retaliation. But Naruto adapted. He shifted his rhythm, feinted with shadow clones, used the terrain to break Vali's line of sight. They exchanged blows that cracked the ground beneath them, dodged attacks that would have leveled buildings, and pushed each other to the edge of exhaustion. The fight ended in a standstill. Vali landed a clean hit that sent Naruto skidding backward, his heels digging furrows in the earth. Naruto responded with a Rasen Shuriken that Vali could not fully divide, the spinning chakra shrieking past his shoulder close enough to shear a few feathers from his wing. They stood across from each other, both breathing hard, both bleeding from a dozen minor wounds. Vali grinned, blood trickling from a split lip, and said that was not bad for an anomaly. Naruto grinned back and said it was not bad for a guy with wings. Vali laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even him, and then he turned and walked away, his silhouette dissolving into the twilight. The duel was over, but the respect between them was forged. Naruto stood on the roof of Ku Academy as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. The academy was quiet, the students gone for the evening, and the breeze carried the scent of cherry blossoms from the courtyard below. Beside him, visible only to his senses and the occasional flicker of light, the translucent silhouette of Kurama lay stretched out, 9 tails curling lazily behind them. The fox's voice rumbled through his mind, asking if he was ready for the next adventure. Naruto smiled. He said he was always ready. Kurama's warmth pulsed with something that felt like pride. They had come a long way from the cage, a long way from the fractured memories and the fear of the unknown. Now standing on this roof, with the weight of 2 worlds balanced across his shoulders, Naruto felt whole for the first time since he had woken in this world. He felt like himself. The sun completed its descent. The stars began to emerge. Naruto turned and walked back inside. That night he returned to his apartment. The door clicked shut behind him, the familiar scent of cheap ramen and old wood greeting him. He shrugged off his jacket and moved toward the light switch, but he stopped before his fingers reached it. Someone was sitting on his bed. In the dim glow from the window, he could see a small figure with long black hair, bare feet dangling over the edge of the mattress. Ophiz, the Ouroboros dragon, looked at him with flat, ancient eyes. Her voice emerged, soft and eerie in the quiet room. She said he would help her find silence. Naruto did not move. Kurama's presence in his chest went absolutely still, every instinct in the ancient fox suddenly on high alert. Ophiz continued, her tone as empty as the void between stars. She explained that his energy, the pre-systemic frequency that his soul emitted, had a quieting effect. When he had manifested the full 9-tailed aura during the raiding game, she had felt the Great Red's roar diminish. For the first time in millennia, there had been a moment of stillness. She wanted more. She wanted silence. Naruto asked what she meant by help. Ophiz tilted her head. She said he would stay with her. He would use his energy to drown out the noise until the Great Red was gone from her perception forever. She did not phrase it as a request. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of a being who had never encountered resistance that mattered. Kurama's voice cut through Naruto's thoughts, sharp and urgent. The fox declared that this was trouble, real trouble. The Ouroboros dragon was not an enemy they could fight with Rasengan and Sage Mode. She was a conceptual entity, a being so far beyond the current political squabbles that the entire 3-faction summit was an ant-hill beneath her notice. And she had fixated on Naruto. Naruto met Ophiz's ancient gaze. He did not agree. He did not refuse. He simply said they would talk more in the morning. Ophiz blinked, the motion slow and unsettling, and then nodded. She said she would wait. She always waited. She did not move from the bed. Her bare feet continued to dangle. Her black eyes watched him with an unblinking patience that spoke of eternal things and endless silence. The screen cut to black. The silence in that small apartment stretched into something unbearable. He's continued to sit on Naruto's bed, her bare feet dangling inches above the floor, her ancient black eyes tracking his every movement with an unblinking patience that felt geological in scale. She had said she would wait, she always waited, and Naruto understood in that crystallizing moment that this was not a threat designed to intimidate him into compliance. It was simply a fact. The Ouroboros dragon had existed long before the three factions, long before the system of devils and angels and fallen had carved their bloody borders across the supernatural world, and she would exist long after all of it crumbled to dust. Waiting was not a tactic for her. It was her natural state. Kurama's presence coiled tight in Naruto's chest, the fox's voice cutting through his thoughts with the razor edge of genuine alarm. The ancient beast declared that they needed a strategy. Ophiz was not like the discordant choir, not like Riser Phoenix, not like any opponent Naruto had faced in either lifetime. She was a dragon god, one of the most powerful beings in existence, and her psychology was fundamentally alien. She did not want conquest or revenge or political advantage. She wanted silence, the absence of noise, and the echo of the nine-tailed fox, the pre-systemic energy that bled from Naruto's soul like an open frequency, had given her a taste of that quiet. Kurama growled that she would not simply accept refusal. Naruto did not respond to his partner immediately. He moved instead, crossing the room with measured steps, and settled into the worn chair near his window. The streetlights outside cast pale orange rectangles across the floorboards. He faced Ophiz with an expression that was neither hostile nor welcoming, but watchful, assessing. He asked her what would happen if he said no. Ophiz tilted her head. The motion was small and slow, like a lizard considering whether a shadow signified prey or predator. She said that refusal was not optimal. If Naruto would not give her silence willingly, she would take him somewhere quiet where she could study the frequency. She would learn to replicate it. The process might take centuries, but time was irrelevant to her. The only thing that mattered was drowning out the Great Red's roar. She paused and then added a clarification that made Kurama's hackles rise. She said she did not require Naruto's cooperation. She required his energy. The difference was academic. Naruto felt Kurama's growl vibrate through his ribcage like a tuning fork. The fox snarled that this was a kidnapping threat delivered with the emotionless precision of a natural disaster. Ophiz was not angry. She was not vengeful. She was simply discussing logistics, the same way a hurricane did not hate the coastline it reshaped. And that, Kurama insisted, made her infinitely more dangerous than Kohath and his fanatics had ever been. Naruto leaned forward in his chair, resting his elbows on his knees. He met Ophiz's ancient gaze and said he understood what she wanted. He understood why she wanted it, but he had conditions. Ophiz blinked. Conditions were not something she encountered frequently. Most beings in her presence either fled, attacked, or worshipped. Negotiation was a foreign concept. She asked what conditions. Naruto counted them off on his fingers. First, he would not leave his friends. The peerage, the people who had become his family in this new world, were non-negotiable. If he wanted his help, she would accept that he had ties, obligations, and a life that he would not abandon. Second, he would need to understand what exactly his energy was doing. Azazel had theories, but if Ophiz could perceive the effect directly, she could help him understand the mechanism. That understanding would make him more useful to her, which aligned with her goals. Third, and most importantly, he would not harm anyone to help her. No collateral damage. No innocent lives consumed in her pursuit of silence. If she could not agree to that, then they had nothing to discuss and she could attempt to take him by force. He did not think he could win, but he promised she would not find the process clean or quiet. The room fell silent again. Ophiz stared at him. Her ancient eyes, black as the void between forgotten stars, reflected nothing. No emotions, no calculations. Just an infinite patience that had watched empires rise and fall without ever finding reason to intervene. Kurama held absolutely still, every nerve in the fox's spiritual body stretched taut, ready to flood Naruto's system with chakra at the first sign of aggression. The moment stretched. 5 seconds, 10, 20. Then He's inclined her head. She said his conditions were acceptable. She would not harm his companions. She would assist him in understanding his energy. But she added a caveat that made Naruto's stomach tighten. If his friends attempted to separate them, if they tried to take him away from her, she would defend her claim. She would not kill them, but she would not allow interference. Naruto was hers now in the sense that a celestial body was part of an astronomer's research. She had invested attention, and attention from the Ouroboros dragon was not a thing lightly set aside. Naruto nodded slowly. He said they had an understanding, and he could work with that. But he also knew with a cold certainty that settled into his bones that he had just bought time, not resolution. Ophiz was not a problem he could solve with a conversation. She was a force of existence, and forces of existence did not negotiate their fundamental natures. They could only be redirected, temporarily. Kurama's voice returned, quieter now, edged with something that might have been grudging respect. The fox said that Naruto had handled the situation better than expected, but the danger had not diminished. Ophiz was patient, but patience was not the same as flexibility. If she decided her conditions were no longer sufficient, she would act without warning. They needed to accelerate their plans. They needed allies who understood the scale of what they were facing. Naruto agreed silently. He rose from the chair and moved to his small kitchen, filling a kettle with water and setting it on the stove. The mundane action felt surreal given the eternal dragon god sitting on his bed, but he had learned long ago that normalcy was a weapon. People underestimated you when you made tea during existential crises. Ophiz watched the kettle with mild curiosity, her head tilting again, and Naruto realized she had probably never seen someone prepare tea before. He asked if she wanted any. She did not answer. She simply continued to watch, and Naruto understood that the question itself was outside her frame of reference. Ophiz did not consume food or drink. She did not sleep. She did not age or tire or experience the thousand small mortal vulnerabilities that defined human existence. She simply was, an eternal presence that had never needed to consider the rituals of finite beings. And yet she was here in his apartment, watching him make tea, because his soul emitted a frequency that quieted the only thing that had ever troubled her infinite existence. The absurdity of it struck Naruto all at once, and he had to suppress a laugh that would have been entirely inappropriate. The kettle whistled. Naruto poured the hot water over a tea bag, the familiar scent of green tea rising in the steam. He sat back down, cradling the warm cup in his hands, and faced Ophiz again. He said they needed to talk about logistics. If she was going to be near him, observing his energy and studying the frequency, they needed to establish parameters. She could not simply appear in his apartment unannounced. The supernatural factions were already on edge after the summit attack, and the sudden presence of the Ouroboros dragon in Ku would trigger panic. He needed her to be discreet. Ophiz considered this. She said discretion was possible. She could mask her presence. She had done so before when she had observed him at the raiding game. None of the assembled faction leaders had detected her. None of the security wards had triggered. She existed outside their detection frameworks the same way his energy existed outside their classification system. They were both anomalies. She found this symmetry satisfying. Naruto felt Kurama stir with a prickle of unease. The fox muttered that Ophiz had been watching them for longer than they had realized. If she had been present at the raiding game, she had witnessed the full manifestation of the nine-tailed aura. She had felt the echo at its most powerful, and instead of being frightened or threatened, she had been drawn. That spoke to a desperation that Kurama did not like. Desperate gods were unpredictable gods. The night wore on. Naruto and Hiz continued to talk, their conversations circling around the nature of his energy, her perception of the Great Red's roar, and the strange quiet that Kurama's echo seemed to create in the dimensional fabric between them. By the time dawn began to gray the edges of the window, Naruto had extracted several crucial pieces of information. First, Ophiz's fixation was specific to his energy signature. Others with similar presystemic signatures, if they existed, would not necessarily draw her attention. It was Naruto himself, the precise frequency of Kurama's echo combined with his own soul, that produced the silencing effect. Second, the effect was not constant. It pulsed, strongest when Naruto was using Sage Mode or when Kurama's aura manifested actively. The passive bleed of chakra was too faint for Ophiz to perceive at a distance. Third, and most chillingly, the Great Red had apparently noticed the silence too. Ophiz mentioned this almost as an afterthought, a flat observation that the Great Dragon had stirred in the dimensional gap. Its attention briefly diverted from whatever cosmic purpose drove its eternal existence. She did not know what this meant. She did not care. But Kurama filed the information away with a growl of deep concern. If the Great Red became curious about them the way Ophiz had become curious, they would have two dragon gods to contend with instead of one. When the first rays of sunlight slipped through the window, Ophiz rose from the bed. Her bare feet made no sound as they touched the floor. She said she would observe from a distance during the day. She would not interfere with his life unless interference became necessary. She would return at night, when the world was quieter, to continue their discussions. Her ancient eyes fixed on Naruto one final time, and she told him that he was interesting. Few things were interesting to her anymore. She hoped he would not become boring. Then she was gone, not teleported, not vanished in a flash of light or a ripple of dimensional energy. One moment she was standing there, and the next moment she was not, as if she had simply decided to stop being present, and reality had complied. Kurama released a breath that Naruto had not realized the fox was holding. The ancient beast's voice came through clear and sardonic. He said, "Congratulations." They had apparently acquired a dragon god stalker. This was, without question, the most ridiculous situation they had ever been in, and that included the time Naruto had met his father inside his own subconscious. Naruto rubbed his face and laughed, the sound ragged with exhaustion. He had not slept. He had not eaten since yesterday afternoon. His body was running on chakra and adrenaline and the stubborn refusal to collapse that had defined his survival through 2 lifetimes. But he was alive. Ophies had not attacked. He had bought time, and time, in Naruto's experience, was the most valuable resource in any conflict. He could work with time. The day that followed was surreal in its normalcy. Naruto attended classes at Ku Academy, his body moving through the routines of student life, while his mind churned through the implications of the previous night. Issei noticed his distraction and asked if he was okay. Naruto waved off the concern with a grin, claiming he had stayed up too late reading Azazel's research notes. Issei accepted this with a knowing nod, launching into a complaint about how boring devil politics were compared to training, and Naruto let the conversation wash over him with a gratitude he did not voice. Issei's normalcy was a comfort. His friend's ability to complain about mundane things in the face of cosmic absurdity was grounding. Koneko was less easily fooled. During their lunch break, she sat down beside him and studied his face with the unblinking intensity of someone who could sense spiritual energy at a level most beings could not comprehend. Her senjutsu training had sharpened her perceptions dramatically. She asked what had happened. She could feel a tension in his chakra, a tightness that had not been there before. Something had changed. Naruto met her golden eyes and weighed his options. Koneko was perceptive. She was also, in many ways, the peerage member who understood him best. They shared the experience of carrying something ancient and feared inside themselves. He decided on partial honesty. He told her that a powerful being had taken an interest in his energy. Not an enemy, not yet, but potentially dangerous. He could not give her details without risking that being's attention, but he needed her to be alert. If she sensed anything strange around Kuo, anything that felt like a void where spiritual energy should be, she needed to tell him immediately. Koneko absorbed this information silently. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and cool against his palm. She said she would watch, she would protect him too. She had not forgotten what he had done for her in the basement when her senjutsu had consumed her and he had reached through the chaos to pull her back. If something was threatening him now, she would not stand aside. Naruto squeezed her hand. He did not tell her that against Ophies, her senjutsu would be about as effective as a paper umbrella against a hurricane. There was no point in frightening her with a threat she could not meaningfully oppose. Instead, he thanked her and said he was counting on her. The words made her eyes soften, and she nodded with a determined set to her jaw that reminded him, achingly, of a younger Hinata promising to stand beside him against impossible odds. The afternoon brought a different kind of complication. Azazel arrived at the Orc clubroom with a stack of research notes and an expression that Naruto had learned to recognize as barely restrained scientific excitement. The fallen governor spread papers across the table, diagrams of energy frequencies and dimensional resonance patterns, and launched into an explanation before anyone could ask questions. He had been analyzing the residual energy from the raiding game, cross-referencing it with historical records predating the Great War, and he had found something remarkable. Naruto's energy signature, the pre-systemic frequency, had appeared exactly once before in recorded supernatural history. A fragmentary account from a fallen angel who had survived the collapse of the previous age, a being so ancient that Azazel had assumed the records were mythological rather than historical. That fallen angel had described an encounter with something they called the World Soul Pulse, a resonance that emanated from a realm beyond the current cosmology. Azazel looked up from his notes, his eyes gleaming with the hunger of a researcher on the verge of breakthrough. He said Naruto was not merely an anomaly. He was a remnant of a previous cosmic iteration, a soul that had been shaped by forces that predated the current supernatural order entirely. The nine-tailed fox, whatever its origins in the elemental nations, had somehow become entangled with a frequency that was older than heaven and hell combined. This explained why the evil peace system could not categorize him. It explained why his energy disrupted magical scans. It explained why the discordant choir had been so desperate to capture him before the summit. They had known, or at least suspected, what Azazel was only now confirming. The room had gone very quiet. Rias stood near the window, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Akeno had stopped mid-pour with a teacup suspended in her hand. Issei looked lost but alert, his instincts telling him that something important was happening even if the details escaped him. Asya clutched her hands together, her eyes wide with worry. Koneko's gaze was fixed on Naruto, her senjutsu humming with the confirmation of what Azazel was saying. Naruto asked what this meant practically. Was his energy a threat to the current system? Was there something about his existence that would destabilize the supernatural world just by being present? Azazel hesitated. The hesitation was more alarming than any answer he could have given. He said that the energy itself was not inherently destabilizing. It was too faint, too passive to cause structural damage to the dimensional framework. But the existence of a pre-systemic soul suggested something that Azazel had been reluctant to voice, even to himself. If the current supernatural order was not the first, if there had been a previous age with its own rules and its own powers, then the current order was not permanent either. And beings like Ophies and the Great Red, who existed outside the faction system entirely, might be remnants of that previous order. Or they might be agents of whatever transition had ended it. The implication hung in the air like smoke. If Naruto's soul was connected to a previous age, and if the dragon gods were also connected to that age, then his arrival in this world might not be random. It might be part of a cycle that no one understood, a cycle that was approaching its next iteration. Rias spoke for the first time since Azazel had begun his explanation. Her voice was controlled, but Naruto could hear the fear beneath it. She asked if Naruto was in danger, not from political factions or ambitious devils, but from something larger, something cosmic. Azazel did not answer immediately. He looked at Naruto, and in that look Naruto saw something he had never seen in the fallen governor's eyes before: uncertainty. Azazel said he did not know. He was operating at the edge of his understanding, piecing together fragments of fragments. What he could say with certainty was that Naruto's energy had drawn the attention of entities far more powerful than any faction leader. The surge during the raiding game had been too large, too pure to go unnoticed. If Azazel could detect its uniqueness with his instruments, beings with cosmic perception would have felt it like a star going nova in their awareness. They needed to prepare for the possibility that something would come looking for him. Naruto almost laughed. Something had already come looking for him. It was currently waiting for nightfall so it could return to his apartment and continue their conversation about silence. But he could not tell Azazel that. Not yet. Not until he understood more about what he's wanted and whether her presence would trigger exactly the kind of cosmic attention Azazel was warning about. Instead, he thanked Azazel for the information and asked for copies of all his research. If he was going to understand his own nature, he needed data. Azazel agreed, though his expression remained troubled. He packed up his notes with less enthusiasm than he had displayed when he first arrived, the weight of his discoveries settling over him like a cloak. Before he left, he paused at the door and looked back at Naruto. He said that whatever was happening, whatever cycle was turning, Naruto should remember one thing: pre-systemic did not mean predetermined. Just because his soul carried echoes of a previous age did not mean he was bound by that age's fate. He had defied classification from the moment he arrived in this world. He could defy cycles as easily as he defied evil pieces. Naruto nodded. He appreciated the sentiment. He was not sure he believed it, but he appreciated it. The evening came too quickly. Naruto excused himself from the clubroom, enduring Issei's knowing grin and Ria's searching look with practiced deflection. He walked home through streets that felt narrower than they should, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. Kurama's presence was a steady warmth in his chest, the fox's instinct scanning the spiritual landscape for any sign of Ophi's approach. They found nothing. She was either not present yet or masking her presence so completely that even Kurama could not detect her. Naruto reached his apartment. He climbed the stairs. He opened the door. Ophi was sitting on his bed again, her bare feet dangling, her black hair pooling around her small shoulders. She looked exactly as she had the previous night. She might not have moved at all in the hours since she had vanished. She was watching the window now instead of the door, her ancient eyes fixed on the emerging stars with an expression that might have been contemplation or might have been complete vacancy. Naruto could not tell. He was not sure the distinction mattered to her. He closed the door behind him and asked if she had been waiting long. Ophi turned her head to face him. She said time was not a relevant measurement. She had observed his day. She had watched him interact with his companions. She found the interactions puzzling. The bonds between them produced emotional frequencies that she could perceive but not understand. She asked why he invested so much energy in temporary connections. All of his companions would die eventually. Their lifespans were flickers compared to what he was becoming. Naruto absorbed this question. It was not malicious. He understood that now. Ophi was genuinely asking the way a child might ask why people cried at funerals. She did not experience attachment. She did not experience loss. She existed in an eternal present where all mortal concerns were as distant and irrelevant as the concerns of bacteria. And yet, she was asking. That meant something. He sat down in his chair and told her about Konoha, about the people he had lost and the people he had saved, about the old man who had given him ramen when the rest of the village spat on him, about the teacher who had believed in him when he was still a failure, about the friend who had been his rival and his mirror and his brother in every way that mattered. He told her that temporary did not mean meaningless. A life that ended was not a life wasted. The connections he formed, the bonds he strengthened, the people he loved and who loved him in return, these were not distractions from some greater cosmic purpose. They were the purpose. They were the only thing that had ever made his existence bearable, the only thing that had ever made it worth fighting for. Ophies listened without interruption. Her ancient eyes never blinked. When Naruto finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said something that made Kurama stir with a strange, complicated emotion that Naruto could not immediately identify. She said she did not understand, she had never understood, but she wanted to. The silence she sought from the Great Red's roar was not enough. Even if she achieved absolute quiet, she would still be alone in it. She had been alone for longer than she could measure. She had never considered that connection might be an alternative to silence. She asked if his bonds could include her. If she could learn what he meant by purpose. Naruto stared at her. The Ouroboros dragon, one of the most powerful beings in existence, was asking him to teach her about friendship. The absurdity was so profound that he almost laughed, but the look in her ancient eyes stopped him. There was something there beneath the flat eternal patience, something that might have been loneliness. Something that might have been the first stirring of a desire that had nothing to do with silence and everything to do with the terrifying vulnerability of caring about another living being. He said she could stay, she could observe, she could learn, but she had to understand that bonds required trust, and trust required honesty, and honesty meant she could not treat his friends as obstacles to be removed. She would have to let them matter to her too. Not as assets or tools or irrelevant mortals, but as individuals whose existence had value independent of her goals. Ophies considered this. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant hum of the city beyond the window. Then she nodded. She said she would try. It was not a promise. It was not a commitment. But it was more than Naruto had expected, and far more than Kurama had thought possible. The fox's voice came through quiet and strange. He said that Naruto had a gift for this. For finding the lost ones. For reaching into the darkness and pulling out something that could become light. Naruto did not know about that. He was not trying to recruit dragon gods or reshape cosmic entities. He was just being himself. The same self that had refused to abandon Sasuke, that had forgiven pain, that had found common ground with Kurama after a lifetime of hatred. If that self could reach Ophies too, then maybe there was hope. Maybe the cycle Azazel feared did not have to end in destruction. Maybe it could end in something new. Ophies rose from the bed and walked to the window. Her small silhouette was outlined against the stars. She said she would continue to observe. She would return tomorrow night, and the night after that. She did not understand bonds yet, but she understood patience. She had infinite patience. If there was something to learn, she would learn it eventually. Naruto smiled. It was a tired smile, worn thin by exhaustion and stress and the sheer overwhelming strangeness of his existence, but it was genuine. He said he looked forward to it. Ophies vanished. The room settled back into ordinary quiet, the kind that came from an empty apartment and a sleeping city and the absence of cosmic entities contemplating the nature of friendship. Kurama's voice returned, dry and sardonic. The fox observed that Naruto had apparently started a collection. First a peerage of devils, then a fallen angel governor as a mentor, and now a dragon god as a student. If this trend continued, by the end of the year they would have the Great Red asking for ramen recommendations. Naruto laughed, the sound bright and genuine in the darkness. He said the Great Red probably had terrible taste in food anyway. Kurama snorted. The tension that had gripped them both since Ophies' first appearance finally began to ease. Not because the danger had passed, it had not, and both of them knew it, but because they had found a way forward. A path that did not require fleeing or fighting or sacrificing everything they had built in this new world. A path that might impossibly lead to something better. The night deepened. Naruto finally ate a bowl of instant ramen that tasted like victory and fell into bed with Kurama's warmth wrapped around his soul like a protective cloak. He dreamed of Konoha, of the Hokage monument catching the sunset, of a bowl of Ikaraku ramen steaming on a familiar counter, of a silver-haired man reading a book with one eye closed in a smile. The dreams were not fractures anymore. They were memories, complete and whole, and he held them close as he slept. The next morning brought fresh air and sunlight, and the distant sound of students gathering for another ordinary day at Ku Academy. Naruto stretched, feeling the pleasant burn of rested muscles, and prepared to face whatever new strangeness the day would bring. He had a dragon god to teach, a peerage to protect, a fox in his soul, and a future that stretched out before him like an unwritten scroll. It was, he reflected, not so different from being Hokage, just with more paperwork shaped like ancient cosmic entities. The doorbell rang. Naruto answered it and found Rias standing on his doorstep, her expression tight with something that mixed urgency and fear. She said Serzech had sent an emergency message. Something had entered the dimensional gap near Kuo, something massive. The entire supernatural world was mobilizing. They needed him at the clubroom immediately. From somewhere beyond the visible spectrum, Naruto felt Ofise's attention sharpen. Kurama's growl rose in his chest. And Naruto understood, with the certainty that came from decades of navigating impossible crises, that the cycle Azazel had warned about was about to move forward whether they were ready or not. The Great Red was stirring, and it was looking toward Kuo. Kurama's voice cut through the morning stillness like a blade through silk. The fox said they had about 30 minutes before the dimensional pressure became physically manifest, less if the Great Red accelerated. Naruto was already moving, grabbing his jacket, his mind snapping into the tactical clarity that had defined his decades as a military leader. He asked Rias for the full situation. She spoke as they ran toward the academy, her words clipped and precise. Serzech had detected the movement 3 hours ago. The Great Red, the Apocalypse Dragon, the being whose very existence defined the boundary between worlds, had shifted its attention toward Kuo. Not an attack, not yet, but an approach. And in the supernatural world, the approach of something that massive was indistinguishable from a natural disaster in slow motion. Every faction was responding. Heaven had mobilized its seraphim. The fallen angels were on high alert. The underworld Satans were convening an emergency council. And at the center of it, somehow impossibly, was a 17-year-old former Hokage who had just promised to teach a dragon god how to make friends. They reached the clubroom to find it already transformed. Azazel stood before a floating holographic display, his expression grim. Vali leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, his predatory calm barely masking the excitement that flickered in his eyes. Serzech projected from a communication circle, his image wavering with dimensional interference. Koneko, Akeno, Issei, and Asya were already present, their faces pale but resolved. The peerage had been through enough by now that cosmic threats no longer paralyzed them. They simply waited for direction. Naruto's entrance shifted the room's gravity. Every eye turned to him. Even Serzech inclined his head in acknowledgement. Azazel spoke without preamble, saying the Great Red was not attacking. Not yet, but its attention was fixed on Kuo with an intensity that suggested something had drawn it here. Something that did not belong in the normal taxonomy of supernatural beings. Azazel's eyes met Naruto's. Something that hummed at a frequency the Great Red had never encountered before. Naruto understood immediately. The pre-systemic energy, the echo of Kurama, the same signature that had quieted Ofise's chaos, the same energy that had allowed her to hear silence for the first time in millennia. The Great Red was the opposite of Ofise. Where she embodied the Ouroboros, the infinite cycle, the Great Red embodied the boundary, the limit, the thing that defined reality by being its edge. And somewhere in the dimensional noise between them, Naruto's existence had become a signal. A frequency that did not fit, a silence that screamed. Kurama spoke in Naruto's mind, his voice stripped of its usual sardonic humor. The fox said the Great Red was old, older than the tailed beasts, older than the sage of six paths, older than the chakra fruit itself. Its perception did not operate on the same scale as mortal minds. It did not want, did not fear, did not plan, it simply was. And if its attention had fixed on Kuo, it was because something had disturbed the fundamental equilibrium of existence itself. Naruto asked if he was that disturbance. Kurama paused, then he said no, not Naruto, the combination. Naruto's pre-systemic energy and Ofise's infinite recursion and the dimensional weakness that 3 faction wars and a near-apocalyptic peace summit had left in their wake. Kuo had become a fulcrum. And the Great Red, as the guardian of boundaries, had noticed the imbalance. Naruto closed his eyes. In the span of 3 heartbeats, he processed tactical options, diplomatic approaches, and the cold calculus of survival. Then he opened his eyes and said they needed to talk to Ofise. Azazel's expression flickered with something between admiration and incredulity. He asked if Naruto was suggesting they negotiate with 2 dragon gods simultaneously. Naruto said they were not negotiating. They were going to listen. Ofise appeared without fanfare. One moment the corner of the clubroom was empty. The next, she stood there in her simple black dress, bare feet pale against the wooden floor, her ancient eyes fixed on Naruto with an intensity that made even Vali tense. She said the Great Red was coming, not to destroy, to understand. The silence had changed. She had changed. and the Great Red, for the first time in the infinite span of its existence, was curious. Serzech asked what that meant in practical terms. Would the Great Red cross into the material plane? Would Ku survive the dimensional pressure of its passage? Ophiz tilted her head, considering the question with the gravity of a being who had existed before the concept of gravity had meaning. She said the Great Red did not cross. It was the boundary. To cross would be to annihilate the boundary, to collapse the distinction between realities, to unmake existence itself. But it could observe. It could press close, and if the pressure became too great, the dimensional fabric around Ku would tear. Not from malice, from simple physics. The weight of a being that defined reality pressing against a reality not designed to contain it. The room absorbed this information in heavy silence. Azazel broke it first. He asked if there was any way to communicate with the Great Red directly, to establish a dialogue, to diffuse the pressure before it became catastrophic. Ophiz said no. The Great Red did not speak. It was not a person, not a mind in any recognizable sense. It was a function, a law of existence given form and will. Naruto stepped forward. He asked if the Great Red could feel. Ophiz's ancient eyes flickered. She said yes, not thought, not language, but sensation. The Great Red felt the boundaries it guarded. It felt the pressures and strains and imbalances of the dimensions it defined. And right now, it felt something new. Something that resonated at a frequency it had never encountered. She looked at Naruto again. It felt him, not as a threat, as a question. The echo of Kurama, the pre-systemic energy that defied all classification, the sage mode that drew natural energy from a world that should not have it, all of it was a question the Great Red had never been asked. And the Great Red was old enough, vast enough, to recognize that unanswered questions were dangerous. It had come to find an answer. Naruto understood. It was not about fighting. It was not about power. It was about resolution. The Great Red was the guardian of boundaries, and Naruto's existence was a boundary violation. Not a crime, not a sin, but an anomaly that required integration. The Great Red was not attacking, it was investigating. And the investigation itself, the sheer weight of its attention, was enough to destroy everything Naruto had come to protect. He asked Ophiz if she could help. She was the Ouroboros dragon, the infinite cycle, the being whose existence was defined in opposition to the Great Red's boundaries. Could she deflect its attention, draw it away? Ophiz was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she could not deflect. She was infinite recursion, and the Great Red was the boundary that defined infinity. They were opposition, they were balance. To deflect would be to unbalance. And she had learned, in her weeks of watching Naruto and his strange, warm, chaotic family, that there were things worth not unbalancing. The admission was small, barely 3 sentences. But from a being like Ophiz, it was a declaration of loyalty that shook the foundations of everything the supernatural world understood about dragon gods. Vali spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had dedicated his life to seeking worthy battles and now found himself facing something that redefined the concept of worthy. He said there had to be another way. If Ophiz could not deflect and the Great Red could not be fought and communication was impossible, then they were facing an extinction event with no possible countermeasure. That was unacceptable. Not because he feared death, the White Dragon Emperor had long since made peace with the possibility of his own destruction, but because he refused to accept a reality in which the greatest battle of his existence was against a force he could not even strike. Naruto turned to face him. He said Vali was thinking about it wrong. The Great Red was not an enemy. It was a force of nature, and forces of nature did not need to be fought. They needed to be understood, redirected, harmonized with. The same way chakra had once been a wild, untamed force until the Sage of Six Paths learned to shape it. The same way natural energy, dangerous and chaotic, could be balanced with physical and spiritual energy to create Sage Mode. The Great Red was not a beast to be slain. It was a boundary to be navigated. And Naruto Uzumaki had spent his entire life, across 2 worlds and 2 lifetimes, learning how to navigate boundaries. The realization settled over the room like a physical weight. Not hope exactly, the situation was still catastrophic, the stakes still impossibly high, but something adjacent to hope. The recognition that the person standing before them had already done what everyone else considered impossible, had already existed in ways that defied classification, had already faced forces that should have destroyed him and come out the other side with a smile on his face and a fox in his soul. If anyone could find a way through this, it was him. Serzech asked what Naruto needed. Resources, personnel, tactical support, whatever he required, the underworld would provide. Naruto shook his head. He said he needed the dimensional coordinates of the Great Red's approach vector. He needed Ophiz to accompany him to the nearest boundary point, and he needed everyone else to trust him. Azazel laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. He said trust was not the issue. Naruto had more trust from the supernatural world than any unaffiliated being in recorded history. The issue was that if Naruto failed, Ku would be annihilated, and the dimensional shockwave would ripple through every faction's territory, potentially reigniting the war they had just barely prevented. Naruto met his eyes. He said he knew. Then he smiled, that same bright, impossible Hokage smile that had carried him through wars and losses and the weight of an entire village's faith. He said failure was not on the table. The table was very crowded already, with paperwork and dragon gods and training schedules, and failure simply did not have a seat. Koneko, who had been silent throughout the briefing, stepped forward. Her senjutsu flared around her in a gentle, controlled aura, the power she had reclaimed thanks to Naruto's intervention, the legacy she had stopped fearing. She said she was coming with him. Her senjutsu could sense natural energy. If the Great Red's approach caused dimensional instability, she could help him find stable ground. Naruto hesitated. Then he nodded. He said he would be grateful for the backup. Akeno stepped forward next. Her fallen angel heritage hummed in her voice as she said she had been studying the dimensional barrier theory Azazel had been developing. If the Great Red was pressing against the boundary, she could reinforce localized sections long enough for Naruto to do whatever he was planning to do. Naruto's smile softened. He said he would be even more grateful. Issei stepped forward. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then he said he had no idea what he could do against a cosmic boundary dragon, but Naruto had believed in him when he was just a perverted idiot who had died in a park, and he was not about to let his friend face something like this alone. The boosted gear flared on his arm. Balance breaker scales shimmered across his shoulders. He said he would find a way to be useful or die trying. Naruto's throat tightened. He reached out and clasped Issei's shoulder. He said Issei had always been useful. The perversion was just a bonus. The tension broke. Issei sputtered. Koneko rolled her eyes. Akeno laughed, the sound bright and warm despite the circumstances. And in that moment, standing in the clubroom with the weight of cosmic annihilation pressing down on them, the Occult Research Club was exactly what Naruto had always known it could be. A team, a family, a peerage in every way that mattered. They moved. The dimensional boundary nearest Ku was a point in the forest outside the academy grounds, where the veil between worlds was thin enough for Azazel's equipment to detect. Naruto stood at the center of a clearing, Ophi's silent at his side. Koneko flanked him to the left, her senjutsu aura spreading outward in a net of perception. Akeno stood to the right, holy lightning flickering between her fingers as she prepared containment wards. Issei guarded the rear, boosted gear ready, balance breaker armor gleaming in the afternoon light. And behind them, invisible but present, Azazel and Vali maintained a perimeter, ready to intercept any opportunistic threats who might see the chaos as an opening. Surzech watched from a projection. Michael observed through a sacred mirror. The entire supernatural world held its breath. The pressure began as a hum. Subtle at first, a vibration in the teeth and bones that could have been mistaken for distant thunder. Then it grew, the air thickened. The sky above the clearing shifted, clouds twisting into patterns that did not obey meteorology. Colors bled at the edges of perception. The boundary between dimensions, normally invisible and imperceptible, became a shimmering curtain of fractured light. Kurama's voice rumbled in Naruto's mind. The fox said the Great Red was close. Not physically close, the Apocalypse Dragon was still in the dimensional gap, still maintaining its function as the boundary between worlds, but its attention was pressing against the veil with the weight of a billion suns. Naruto felt it. The echo of Kurama responded instinctively, Fox Red chakra rising to meet the pressure. But Naruto did not let it flare into combat readiness. He breathed, centered himself, reached for the natural energy that saturated the forest, the same energy he had learned to draw upon in a world far from this one, the same energy that Azazel's training had helped him shape in this world. Sage mode activated. Orange pigment ringed his eyes. His pupils became horizontal slits, and in that state, balanced perfectly between physical, spiritual, and natural energy, he extended his perception outward. He did not attack, did not defend. He simply opened himself to the Great Red's attention and let the Apocalypse Dragon feel what he was. The echo of Kurama, the pre-systemic energy, the soul of a Hokage who had died in one world and woken in another. The bonds he had forged with Rias, with Issei, with Koneko and Akeno and Asya and Azazel and Vali and Ophi's. Every connection, every memory, every scar and smile and moment of impossible hope. He let the Great Red feel all of it. The pressure intensified. Dimensional veil shuddered. Akeno's wards flickered. Koneko's senjutsu flared as she anchored herself to the earth. Issei braced, boosted gear screaming with accumulated power. Ophi's watched, her ancient eyes wide with something that might have been wonder. Then the Great Red responded, not with words, not with thought, with feeling. A vast, wordless acknowledgement that rolled through the dimensional boundary like a tide of slow thunder. It was not anger, was not fear, was not any emotion a mortal mind could name. It was recognition. The Great Red had encountered something it did not understand, something that existed outside the boundaries it defined, something that was not a violation but an exception, a new category, a new law, and laws, even cosmic laws, could be rewritten. Naruto spoke. His voice carried through the clearing, amplified by Sage Mode and Kurama's chakra and something deeper, something that resonated with the dimensional boundary itself. He said he knew the Great Red could not understand words, but he hoped it could understand intent. He was not a threat, not an invader, not a corruption. He was a visitor, a traveler who had crossed boundaries he did not fully understand to find a home he had not expected. He had brought with him the echo of a being who had once been feared as a demon but had become a partner. He had brought with him a way of manipulating energy that predated the current supernatural taxonomy. But none of that made him a danger to the boundaries the Great Red guarded. He was simply a new variable, a new term in the equation, and equations could be solved without violence. The pressure held, the sky twisted, the dimensional veil strained, then it eased, not completely, not permanently, but enough. The overwhelming weight of the Great Red's attention receded, pulling back from the boundary like a tide retreating from the shore. The clouds untangled, the fractured colors faded. The hum in the bones became a whisper, then a memory, then nothing. The Great Red had found its answer. Naruto Uzumaki was an anomaly, but he was not a threat. He was a new boundary, a new definition, a new way of being that the Apocalypse Dragon had never encountered. And the Great Red, in its infinite, ancient, incomprehensible wisdom, had decided that new boundaries were worth preserving. The clearing was silent. Akeno's ward stabilized. Koneko's senjutsu calmed. Issei's balance breaker retracted. Ophi's tilted her head, her expression unreadable, and said the Great Red was returning to its vigil. It was satisfied. It would not press again, not unless Naruto gave it reason. Naruto let out a breath he had not realized he had been holding. Sage Mode faded. The orange pigment receded from his eyes. Kurama's voice returned, exhausted but deeply, fiercely proud. The fox said that was either the bravest thing he had ever seen or the stupidest. Probably both. Naruto laughed, the sound shaky with adrenaline and relief. He said both sounded about right. Then the peerage surrounded him. Koneko grabbed his arm, her grip firm and grounding. Akeno pressed against his other side, her usual elegant composure cracked by tears she was not bothering to hide. Issei clapped his shoulder so hard it nearly knocked him over. And behind them, in the shadows of the forest, Azazel exhaled slowly and said to Vali that the kid had actually done it. Vali said nothing. But his smile, faint and grudging and deeply impressed, spoke volumes. Surzetch's voice crackled through the communication circle, strained with relief and something like awe. He said the dimensional pressure was dropping across all monitoring stations. The Great Red was withdrawing. Ku was safe. The summit could proceed. The peace could hold. Naruto looked up at the sky, now ordinary and blue and completely unthreatening. He thought of Konoha, of the Hokage monument, of a silver-haired man who had taught him that true strength was not in fighting but in protecting. He thought of Kurama, who had once been his enemy and had become his soul. He thought of everyone he had lost and everyone he had found. And he understood with a clarity that transcended worlds and lifetimes that this was what he had been reborn to do, not to fight wars or defeat enemies or reshape the supernatural order, but to exist as proof that boundaries could be crossed without being broken, that anomalies could be integrated without being destroyed, that the unknown did not have to be feared. The peace summit concluded 3 days later. The three factions signed a formal treaty, the first of its kind in the history of the supernatural world. Surzetch Lucifer, Michael the Archangel, and Azazel, the governor of the fallen angels, stood together before an assembly of hundreds and declared that the era of war was over, not because all conflicts had been resolved, not because all grievances had been healed, but because they had finally, after millennia of bloodshed, found something worth protecting more than they hated each other. A future, a new generation, a boy with fox-red energy and a smile that defied despair. Naruto attended as an honored guest, seated between Rias and Ophi's. He watched the treaty signing with quiet satisfaction, feeling Kurama's warmth pulse in his chest. The fox observed that they had done it. Against all odds, against every expectation, they had helped forge a peace that might actually last. Naruto agreed. Then he grinned and said they had also created approximately 17 new diplomatic incidents in the process. Kurama snorted. He said that was probably a record. Naruto said records were made to be broken. After the ceremony, in the grand hall of the neutral territory where the summit had been held, Naruto gathered his people. Ria stood at his side, her hand in his, the engagement she had fought so hard to escape now replaced by a bond she had chosen freely. Akeno stood nearby, her smile genuine and unguarded, her fallen angel heritage no longer a source of shame but a facet of her identity she had learned to honor. Koneko leaned against the wall, her senjutsu aura visible as a gentle shimmer around her shoulders, the power she had reclaimed now fully integrated into her sense of self. Issei stood with Asuya, their easy companionship a testament to how far they had both come since the day he died and she was excommunicated. Asuya's smile was radiant, her healing now recognized not as heresy or holiness but as simple, profound kindness. Vali stood at the edge of the group, his presence a silent declaration that he had found something worth more than solitary battle. Azazel nursed a drink nearby, his expression caught between scientific curiosity and genuine affection. Ophiz sat in a chair that was far too large for her, her ancient eyes watching Naruto with the focused attention of a student learning a completely new subject. Zenobia, newly assigned as a permanent liaison between the church and the Gremory household, stood at attention like the soldier she was, though her posture relaxed fractionally whenever Naruto glanced her way. Naruto looked at them, his family, his team, his proof that boundaries were not walls but doorways. He said he had an announcement. The room quieted. Kurama's voice, dry and knowing, said this should be good. Naruto ignored him. He said he had spent the last 6 months trying to understand who he was in this world, what he was, whether he belonged in any of the categories the supernatural world tried to place him in. And after everything, the battles, the politics, the cosmic dragons, the paperwork, he had finally figured out the answer. He did not belong to any category. He did not belong to heaven or hell or the fallen or the underworld or any faction that had ever existed. But he did belong. He belonged to the people who had accepted him without classification, who had trusted him without proof, who had fought beside him without hesitation. He belonged to the peerage that had become a family, to the fox who had become a partner, to the future they were all building together. He was, he said with a grin, still not joining any system, but he was staying. For as long as they would have him. Ria's eyes filled with tears. Akeno's composure finally cracked completely. Koneko smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed her face. Issei shouted something enthusiastic and slightly inappropriate. Asuya clasped her hands together in joy. Azazel raised his glass in a silent toast. Vali inclined his head, acknowledging a truth he had long since accepted. Ophiz said nothing. But her ancient lips curved upward in what might, on a being less terrifying, have been called a smile. And Naruto Uzumaki, the seventh Hokage of the Hidden Leaf, the echo of the nine-tailed fox, the anomaly that no faction could classify, stood in the center of his found family and felt, for the first time since waking in this strange and terrifying world, completely at home. 6 months later, Ku Academy graduated its senior class. Naruto Uzumaki, whose official records listed him as a transfer student of ambiguous origin, and whose unofficial records had been classified by 3 separate supernatural intelligence agencies, walked across the stage with a diploma in one hand and Kurama's warmth in his chest. The peerage cheered from the audience. Rias, who had graduated the year before, threw flowers. Akeno, elegant as ever, waved with tears in her eyes. Koneko, now a fully trained senjutsu practitioner and official instructor for the next generation of Nekomata, allowed herself a visible smile. Issei, who had somehow managed to pass despite spending more time training with Naruto than studying, pumped his fist in the air. Asuya, who had found her calling as a healer without borders, clapped with genuine delight. Azazel sent a message that simply read, "Congratulations, don't let it go to your head." Vali sent nothing, but a white dragon-shaped sigil appeared on Naruto's desk that morning, which was Vali's equivalent of a heartfelt speech. Surzech sent a formal commendation from the underworld. Michael sent a blessing. Even Ajuka Beelzebub, still mildly irritated by Naruto's existence, sent a note acknowledging his contributions to the stability of the supernatural treaty. And Ophiz, who had been learning about friendship at Naruto's side for half a year, presented him with a gift. A small, perfectly smooth stone that hummed with dimensional energy. She said it was a piece of the boundary the Great Red guarded, a fragment of silence, for when he needed quiet, Naruto accepted it with the gravity such a gift deserved. That evening on the roof of Ku Academy, Naruto sat with his family and watched the sunset. The sky was the color of foxfire, orange and red and gold. Kurama's translucent form manifested behind him, 9 tails sweeping lazily in the evening breeze. The fox asked what came next. Naruto considered the question. There were still threats. The discordant choir had been broken at the summit, but remnants scattered. New factions were rising to fill the power vacuum left by the old order's dissolution. Ophiz's former organization, the Chaos Brigade, was leaderless and fragmented, and some of its members still harbored ambitions that would need to be addressed. Vali had mentioned rumors of something stirring in the deeper dimensions. Azazel's research into the pre-systemic energy was opening doors that might lead anywhere. The work of protecting the peace they had built would never truly end. Naruto said what came next was whatever they wanted. They had a home, they had each other. They had a future that was not dictated by ancient grudges or cosmic boundaries. They could train, could explore, could learn and grow and face whatever challenges arose, but they would do it together, as a family, as a team. As proof that the impossible was only impossible until someone did it. Kurama was silent for a long moment. Then the fox said that sounded like a decent plan. Naruto grinned. He said he had learned from the best. The fox snorted. He said Naruto had learned from a grumpy old fox who had been stuck in a cage for a century and had very questionable taste in partners. Naruto said exactly. The sunset deepened. The stars emerged, one by one, scattered across the darkening sky like promises waiting to be kept. And somewhere in the dimensional gap, the Great Red maintained its eternal vigil, aware now of a new variable in the equation of existence. Not a threat, not a violation, a boundary that had become a doorway, an anomaly that had become an anchor. A boy who had carried the echo of a ninth tale across worlds and turned it into the foundation of a new age.